Item number 8, update on community growth and development.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission, and happy last Planning Commission meeting of the year. It's a pleasure tonight to report back to you on community growth and development. This was promised to the Planning Commission at this meeting, and we're doing our best to deliver. We apologize for the AV issues this evening. I can guarantee you that at 5 o'clock it worked perfect, but of course, 2 hours later, here we are. The slides, though, were distributed to the Planning Commission with your packets, so you have materials that you can look on, although we can't show you the great pictures tonight. If we do, in fact, get AV going during the presentation, we'll bring it up. In any case, we promised this growth on community update and development, and we'd like to share some observations with the Planning Commission this evening. We have some interesting facts as we consider potential updates to our general plan and potential amendments to our mixed-use development requirements in the community. Our second slide is regarding the general plan framework. The Commission is aware the city had comprehensively updated our general plan in 1992, and that plan actually considered 2010 development capacities in the community. Obviously, we're past that horizon year of the 92 general plan, but since that time in 92, the city has been updating many of the elements along the way, including our housing and circulation elements. The circulation element was comprehensively updated in 2010, and as well as recreation and parks, safety, and the land use element itself of the general plan, which usually undergoes several annual changes as we move forward. There has been direction from the City Council to report back in February on a process for doing a comprehensive update to the general plan or an incremental update to those elements that require some further study and analysis. I would comment there are several elements of our general plan that could use improvement. New topics such as smart growth, greenhouse gas, sustainable development, those are all areas that our general plan does not have an in-depth discussion on, and those are areas that I think would be very important to consider as you look at new policies for the community's future growth. But tonight's not all about the general plan. We're just reporting on growth and development. And I should report that the general plan, in anticipating the year 2010, said we're going to build all this by 2010, and here's what we can expect. And it also thought that we would do that in the areas of residential, commercial, industrial, and institutional. We can report that we will not reach the residential development capacities that we expected by 2010 until the year 2025 or later. Our planned commercial and industrial growth will not reach the general plan studied amounts until well after the year 2030. The council receives an annual update on community growth and development. It happens every year, usually a month or two prior to December, in which we report for the region-wide congestion management plan. That CMP report comes directly from our building permit records and covers such things as housing, commercial, industrial, and institutional change in the community. The report the council received a couple of months ago showed that the city last year, in all of 2015, this year I should say, gained 24 housing units and added 1,475 square feet of commercial uses. That additional 24 housing units is added to our city's housing stock of well over 30,000 housing units. So in terms of population and housing, I think it's important the Planning Commission understand how the city's population and housing has changed over time. I'll be on slide 5 now if you're flipping. The first 2 slides, or these next 2 slides, will be looking at really when the city's growth happened and what's happened recently. The lion's share of community growth occurred prior to 1970 in this community. You'll see that from 1980 through the present year, going on to slide 7, that there's been very little growth. In fact, from 1970 through the year 2000, the city's population increased by 7,000 residents in 30 years. As I said before, the growth period for the community was 1940 through 1970. 1970 virtually ended growth. And since 2000, the city's population has remained fairly consistent, and it has a growth rate of about 0.5% per year. You'll see on the chart that from the 2000 to the 2010 census, the population change was 5.2%. So the current population now stands at 67,815 people, and that is according to the American Community Survey, which is published by the U.S. Department of Census. Housing unit growth much mirrors the same population trends that we talked about. Housing unit growth has actually slowed each decade as a result of downzoning. Commission's familiar with the 70s when we were going to be Miami Beach and we allowed 110 feet in building height along the Esplanade. Since I've been with the city, we've gone from 110 to 45 to 38 to 30 feet. These are some of the changes we've made in downzoning property in the community. You'll see that if you go along the Esplanade or elsewhere in town, where you can just say that was built in 1970, there's 80, there's 90. It's very clear, and we've got some slides that would actually show you that. But we were talking about housing unit growth from 2009 through 2015 because we want to give you the latest information we have. There's a chart on page 8 of your slides that will show that. I can go back a little bit and talk about in the 70s, Redondo was producing 562 new housing units per year. In the 1980 10-year period, we were producing 235 units of housing per year. In the 1990s, we produced 132 units of housing per year. And in the last 6 years, 2009 through 2015, 364 units have been developed. However, 292 units have been demolished. So in terms of housing unit change, you saw that this year was 24 unit gain. Prior years are 1 unit, 7 units, 15 units. We are a substantially built out community. In the coastal zone, the change has been even smaller. As reported in 2010, the annualized change in the coastal zone since 2004 has been 6.8 units per year. The city's general plan, getting back to the general plan, anticipated an 18% gain in housing between 1992 and 2010. That would have been an annual increase of 0.9% per year. As I mentioned earlier, we won't reach the general planned capacity till well after 2025 at current rates. So what should we anticipate on page 10 of your presentation? For planning purposes, we use a very extremely conservative growth assumption. The bar chart on page 10 shows you a housing unit growth rate of 120 units per year for this next planning period through 2030. Given our 24 units per year that we experienced last year and going backwards, this is an extremely conservative assumption. But we do want to plan for all potential growth. So we look forward at a housing unit growth rate of 120 units per year for the entire community. So back in 2007, we had a Citizens Growth Management and Traffic Committee. The purpose of that was to address the residents' concerns about too much growth and too much potential growth. The Growth Management and Traffic Committee adopted a comprehensive, and that was basically a rewrite of the city's transportation, mobility, and circulation element. So what they did is look at all potential growth in the community, how that would impact all intersections in the community, and look at what improvements we needed to make in the community to accommodate that growth and to maintain our levels of service for infrastructure and traffic. On your slide, which is probably in black and white on page 11, the 2007 through 14 annual increase in residential was estimated at 0.8% or 263 units per year for that period. And then after that well, let's just stick with that from 07 through 14. So that's 263 units that were planned for per year. The actual change was 18.71 units per year. So this is planned for and actually accomplished. From 2014 through 2030, we have put into our transportation discussions and our transportation improvement plans an increase at the 10-year average rate of 0.4%, which is 120 units per year. I'll keep coming back to that, with 1,900 in total units being planned between 2014 and 2030. Again, a very conservative estimate given our actual housing production. In the last 6 years, the city has developed 72 net new units. That is 12 units per year. So if you want to go back in the most recent range of construction and activity, we average 12 units per year. We plan for 120 units per year. In 2007, those numbers were used, and the circulation element of the general plan identifies 14 intersections in the community that need upgrades to accommodate that growth. It also looks citywide at all other infrastructure capacity. So the next slide is about residential in 2030. If in fact we develop 120 units per year, and in fact the population then also increases 8,192 people at the growth rate that's projected, we would basically be about 12.5% above 2007 levels. The adopted general plan from 92 actually allowed an 18% increase and predicted almost a 1% gain per year in residential development. So we're planned for about twice the development that we're experiencing. Generally across the board, in some cases, only a tenth of that development is occurring, as in the 12 units and 120 units I described earlier. So with respect to commercial and industrial, that's always a more difficult element of the community to plan and estimate. We go years without any new commercial development, then we'll have a large project. I can give you some examples, but even the South Bay Marketplace, which went up south of the Galleria, actually was replacing as 119,000 square feet of new development, replacing a little over 70,000 square feet of existing. So most of our projects, just like most of our residential projects, are much a replacement project as anything else. But with respect to commercial, industrial, and institutional, the circulation element in 2007 said we better look forward, and we said let's plan for 1.4 million square feet of new development. What would happen if we did that?
Aaron, can we
Would you mind if I
ask a question?
interrupt? you
Sure.
just after- So talking about, and the fact because if the plan is, and we would have either ignored the plan or done something really different, or we'd have something that would be unexpected, something that supports a lot more than we really ended up having. Do you understand my point?
That's correct. And because if you make an assumption that we are going to have those additional housing units and that additional commercial, industrial, and institutional growth, you've already planned improvements that exceed the requirements for your plan, for the actual development. Example, 14 intersections that require improvements won't be necessary until such time as that growth level occurs. So basically the answer is we're behind our plan. Our plan sees further out and looks at more intense development in the community than we're actually experiencing. That isn't a problem. What would be a problem is a plan that did not anticipate that growth and didn't have mitigation measures. So,
But what would have happened if the plan, if actual had been just like the plan? We would have had to be doing a lot more than we ended up doing. Right?
that's correct. That's correct. And
That's driven on a shorter time frame. Like next year, we go, oh, we need to mitigate the traffic in 5 intersections, and we're basing that on what really is happening. I'm just trying to get a sense of the how we differentiate actual versus plan in terms of the supporting infrastructure.
so the mitigation requirements are triggered at those development levels. In other words, if we were to revitalize the waterfront, we understand there are 6 intersections that happen to be 6 intersections that we've known all along would need improvement, and we were going to accomplish those 6. There are still another 14 minus 6, so there's still another set of improvements that if the community experienced further growth that we would want to accomplish.
So the bottom line is, if we had been consistently meeting those much higher growth numbers in actual practice, then we would have also each year probably been doing more infrastructure work to support it.
Yeah, those things would have already been done
Okay.
because we could not allow the growth without the improvements.
Okay, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that.
Commissioner Barrow?
I think that answered my question at the very end. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron.
So on commercial and industrial, the traffic engineering firm of Fair and Pierce, who has done our city's certified and validated traffic model, studied what would happen to the community if we developed 1.4 million square feet of new commercial and industrial uses by the year 2030. That million square feet was citywide and did not include Harbor Pier area. The 400,000 square feet was allocated to the Harbor and Pier in 2007. The circulation element comprehensively studied traffic citywide, and as I said, identified all street segments, all intersections, and all necessary improvements to support that level of development. You do have a slide in your packet showing actual commercial and industrial development from 2009 through 2015. That matches up with the residential development slide. It shows that although we had projected 50,000 square feet of commercial and industrial each year through 2030 on our city system, the actual amount that we've annually gained has been 23,500 square feet approximately. So we're, again, about double what we expect. We're planning for about double the commercial and industrial use that we're actually accomplishing. So the Harbor and Pier area has had actually no net new development for 16 years. Just a fact. Until the recent Shade Hotel, 16 years prior, nothing had been developed. In the last 20 years, only Kincaids on the pier and Rubies were developed at approximately 12,000 square feet and 4,700 square feet. It's easy to see why our plan's ahead if you're not experiencing growth and development. Despite the prior land use plans allowing up to 1.6 million square feet in those areas. So even if you plan, it doesn't mean it's going to come. The city's definitely mature and our growth rates have moderated. We have some infrastructure that exists, but it's necessary to update and modernize that as new development occurs. Annual commercial and industrial change estimates. I'm on slide 16. So the Growth Management Traffic Committee said, we're going to look at this 1.4 million square feet. We'll plan 50,000 square feet citywide and the 400,000 in the harbor when it occurs and when we see that come forward. That kind of raised the issue of, well, isn't this going to cause a lot of traffic? And that's why the circulation element identifies all of those intersections in the community and says exactly what's going to happen if we experience this growth. There's a very strong belief in the community that traffic's increased substantially in the last 20 years. And staff actually thought that was the case until we really looked into the actual daily traffic numbers in our community. There's a set of slides in your presentation. Primarily they're focused on PCH, but you'll see that starting in the south end of the city at PCH and Palos Verdes Boulevard, there's 3,000 less cars per year than there were in 1990 traveling that intersection. Well, things are still busy, and it's really counterintuitive to believe there's less volume. These are actual counts from Caltrans. Clearly, we show that traffic has not increased substantially in over a 20-year period.
These numbers are trips per year.
These are average daily trips, so these are daily traffic numbers. The PCH Torrance volumes have increased slightly. That's a CMP monitoring intersection. And as the commission might be aware, we actually have planned improvements now for all 4 legs of that PCH Torrance Boulevard intersection. The northbound leg of PCH is where CVS is, has a fully funded right turn project that's in plan review with Caltrans for the last many, many months. The southbound leg, which would be on the 76 station side, has a southbound improvement to provide an additional right turn lane and free those 2 through travel lanes. The eastbound leg of Torrance Boulevard would receive a right turn lane to allow the 2 lanes to flow through freely. And so that intersection, again, has mitigation which is identified, and some of which is funded and under construction, or will be as soon as we get our final permits. So Torrance Boulevard has experienced some increase. PCH at Aviation and Hermosa was also shown on this slide. It's an extremely erratic intersection, and there has been some increase in volume. There are gaps on your chart due to the non-reporting data on Caltrans for those years. Next slide's actual volumes at those intersections. When we get to slide 24, you'll see that Manhattan Beach Boulevard is a little bit counterintuitive in that there's been a decrease in traffic there in the last 20 years. And it's held steady for the last 7 years at a lower volume than it had in the 90s. And a lot of that has to do with aerospace employment. And we find, just a point for everyone to understand is after doing an origin and destination study of our traffic, when we updated the circulation element in 2010, 1 out of 3, 33% of our cars in the community don't either start here or end here. They're just passing through. So whatever we build or develop isn't influenced by how many cars. A third of the traffic we would have no effect on. Another third of the traffic is morning school hour traffic. So another item that we don't have too much control over, parents driving their kids to school. But those 2 components of traffic are 60% of our cars during a peak hour, meaning that what we've developed in town is only responsible for 40% of the traffic that you see on the roadways. So it is interesting to see where traffic comes from and where it goes to. Now we have here actual Manhattan numbers. When we get up to Rosecrans on PCH, this is what I expected I'd see for Redondo Beach. Volumes have pretty much steadily climbed and climbed and climbed. And what you've seen there is a substantial increase in growth. You've seen million square feet commercial projects going up. Rosecrans has turned into an employment and other center. And you have large new shopping facilities developed on this street. Those numbers are what happens when you have substantial growth in the community. And if you've ever driven up on Rosecrans, you know it's a very busy segment. Just thought we'd put that in there to show you what happens when you do have growth in the community. So what can we expect in terms of growth impacts? I thought I'd put into the presentation some impact factors and measurements, and just kind of go back and remind folks of what types of land uses generate what types of impacts in the community. This is slide 30. On this chart, you'll see single family in comparison to multifamily. And we compare all the way down the chart in terms of daily trips per unit, peak hour trips per unit, water use per unit, sewer discharge, and student generation. And all of these factors were studied by Growth Management in 2010. So these are the exact numbers from their homework. This was their job to say, what happens if we add all this growth to the community? What you'll see is that multifamily is generating about 38% less daily traffic than single family, about 49% less peak hour trips, about 30% less water use, about 30% less sewer use, and about 45% less student generation. So per unit of housing, multifamily is substantially less impactful.
Why do you think that is?
It's a function of the type of family that may want to live in that unit.
Number of cars per person living there? Or?
All the above. All the above. A traditional single-family home generates about 9 trips per day, whereas a multifamily unit generates about six trips per day. And that's pretty consistent if you think about it. So it's also how many households with kids. One of the reasons our population's gone up, and this is a sidebar, but our persons per household has gone down until about 1990, where we got down to 2.13 persons per household. So that's basically saying not a lot of kids. And we got down to 2.13, and you'll see now that we've popped back up to 2.3 persons per household in the latest information. Part of that is a function of just availability of new residential things. This is 2 engineers now buying a home to get, to rent a unit, or people actually growing a household because of the lack of availability of housing. So our housing sizes are increasing because primarily we're not developing housing. So anyway, throw out these comparison factors. They are used for our sewer studies for the community, for all our planned sewer improvements, capacities. I use the RBUSD student generation study for the student generation, and these are all things you plan for when you plan a community.
By the way, that I assume means students that are going to be going to Redondo School.
This would be...
Generation is kind of a funny term. So these little students being popped out. But that's what it means, right?
Commissioner Gann has a question. Aaron.
I'm sorry.
Sure.
Under multifamily, you don't differentiate between condominiums and apartments.
You're right.
You do not.
We do not.
Right. And so that could...
I would-
go ahead.
Am I done?
I don't know.
Oh, okay. Just was checking. There's more traffic in apartments than there is in condominiums. So I just don't know how you can compare a condo, which is more like single-family ownership, to an apartment, which has turnover, much higher turnover.
We could probably distill out the single-family rental versus ownership units out of this, but there isn't a lot of data to suggest that there's much of a difference between the two. But we'll look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Aaron, wouldn't it also take into consideration, let's say retired people living in condos, not wanting to maintain the yard, and also retirement communities that we've added?
Yeah, those would all be included here under just multifamily designation.
Okay.
Yeah, and the monthly reporting, now I talk about annual reporting, we actually track these numbers monthly. And we report to the state and the county tax assessor on our monthly changes. So we can look at valuations of units per month and any statistic you want relative to single family, multifamily. I could probably pull condo out of there as a separate line item.
Is there any way to correlate, multifamily or single family to mass transit use? I would think that there's got to be something there.
I can correlate students to mass transit unit use because we sell the passes and we know who's riding. We'll have to look further, but certainly ask away, because this is a workshop. You guys ask the questions you want.
I'd be careful. I would think there's got to be something there.
Commissioner Mitchell?
Yeah, and the other thing too, I mean, I know that this is hard to capture, but you start thinking about our region in the South Bay, and you think about an extension of a green line that goes to Old Town Torrance and what that's going to do. I mean, that just means more people getting out of their cars. I know a lot of people in the millennial generation. It's amazing to me how they don't want to own a car, and they don't, and they're taking their bike, they're taking the bus, and they're taking rail. I've been working on a project downtown. I've been taking the 438 bus. It's amazing how many people are on this thing, young and old, but a lot of young people. They don't want to drive, and I understand why. It's these options that we have, and I just think to myself, how is that, going to be able to be added to our continued study? I mean, I would assume that with these things happening that we're going to see less traffic as we go along, because I'm telling you, the millennials, man, I maybe know 1 or 2 out of 10 that I know that actually own a car, so.
Well, when we talk about the transportation performance of different types of development, we have a lot of good studies that talk about our centers and our corridors. Bill Fulton did a comprehensive study and actually surveyed Redondo residents throughout the Riviera Village area, as well as residents along Artesia corridor, and did a very accurate statistical analysis of the modes and how people move and how many miles they do travel. In the years going forward, this commission is not going to be considering traffic from a standpoint of level of service of an intersection anymore. It's not how many cars we're going to be able to put up and down a street. It's going to be how does that development reduce people's need to drive, and how does it increase their ability to walk, bike, and otherwise get services they need. And the state's changed that law. We're just waiting for OPR to start putting that into effect. So the idea that level of service should be level A everywhere in the community is not becoming the most important thing.
And maybe another thing too, as far as capturing, is probably going to be tough, but the technology that continues to get better allows people to work from home. Sometimes once a week or twice a week, or sometimes it's the whole freaking week. And so there's less of that need to or want to get in a car and go somewhere for work. So I certainly know that as we continue in our technology, I think that there's going to be more opportunity for people to work from home. That just means less vehicles mile traveled. I mean, our own AQMD says 90% of our pollution comes from mobile sources. So, hey, we already live in a great place. It's got great air, probably some of the best in the whole basin. And certainly if people are working from home more, then we can just see better air.
Commissioner Rob?
Yeah, I was kind of curious. You stated a couple of percentages, which was like about 40% being those that are passing through, 30-ish% of those that are school related. I was kind of curious if we have any trend studies. In other words, is the percentage of those components actually increasing? In other words, is there more development, from our neighboring towns coming through with respect to the past? And I guess as a corollary, I guess the fact that I think we have more students in the school district. I know in the high school has increased, substantially. So I would assume that the component related to school trips, has increased with respect to time. But I was wondering if you had any insight to that.
We don't have any really granular analysis. We have an actual origin destination studies. We don't have anything forward of, say, 2010 as far as whether people's habits have changed. But there is new data available via actually cell phone tracking and other methods to get that information. And so I see us needing to update that and look at some of the trends further. So that's a good point that we should track people's behavior. The Beach Cities Health District in their Blue Zones project did quite a bit of work about making the healthy choice the easy choice, and the walking, the biking, the moais, and the other work that we were involved with greatly. And they used the Gallup poll to kind of go back and really document the results of their efforts. And they found out that this town lost weight. This town did move. It became more active and in a meaningful way. So, and some of us started out a little bit more ambitious and kind of fell off on it, but for a while there, could all check our bathroom scales. We kind of know whether we were getting out of our cars and getting around town other ways. So,
Commissioner Goodman?
What an interesting metric, pounds per town. I was just curious, back on slide 30 where we break down the daily trips and peak hour trips, how does that done? I mean, how does this data captured? On the others, water use, sewer, you could kind of understand how you could capture that information, but how do they know when people are driving by whether they're from a single family or multifamily?
well, the Holy Grail source is the Institute of Traffic Engineers.
But how would they?
And they actually do studies and have done studies in depth about.
Like in residential?
Correct.
Street, whatever they call those things.
Well, beyond tube counts, this kind of data actually comes from questionnaires and surveys.
Okay.
So it's the best we can come up with.
Right. I was just curious how you come up with that.
Right, and to add what Commissioner Mitchell was saying about telecommuting, when I broke my foot and I was in a cast for a month, I only went into the office 1 day a week, and the other 4 I sat on the couch and didn't go anywhere. And I lost my carpool buddy because he's telecommuting now 100% of the time. So.
Okay, well, I wanted to get out some numbers about the types of traffic from different development. We went over on slide 31 the planned maximum estimate for new commercial and industrial, and including the breakdown. When you allocate this square footage, you can actually convert those into traffic trips on this city street system. And let me see if the next slide's got the detail, but let's see, with a what-if scenario, so we said that 1 million square feet of commercial industrial would generate 10,700 trips a day and 938 on a peak hour. Office use would generate a couple thousand more. Industrial at 500,000 square feet is 3,000 more. And when you add all this stuff up, along with the planned 400,000 feet in the waterfront area, we'll get to a slide in a second that'll explain what that means for the community. But on our next slide, number 32, let's focus in on the waterfront and the planned maximum 400,000 square feet of net new development. We actually looked at that amount of development way back in 2007. We estimated that development would generate 17,000 new daily trips, and of those 1,500 being in a peak hour. Fast forward to 2015 with full traffic analysis and a breakdown of a project that's a lot restaurant, 35, a little bit of retail, 20%, hotel 24, office 12, cinema 9. This entire development would only generate 12,550 trips, 782 peak. The peak hours about 50% less than we planned for back in 2007. The total trips are the difference between 17,000 and 12,000. So just to have an idea that we plan for a lot more than we tend to produce. That's a good point for tonight's meeting. Plan for the worst and hope for the best. So we looked at this 1.4 million square feet and the potential new population and residential growth through 2030. And we did a little what-if analysis. What if our population increased 8,172 people by 2030, resulting in a new town population of 73,000? That would be 0.6% per year. I mentioned earlier our actual population change from 2000 to 2010 was 0.5%, so that's not far off. What if housing units increased 0.6% per year? That would mean another 3,700 housing units in the community. What if industrial increased to a total of 6.8 million square feet, 0.4% per year? And what if commercial increased 900,000 square feet to bringing us to 7.1 million, which would be a 0.7%. And so run those all into the chart on the next page, and you'll see the total community-wide additional traffic that was estimated, 34,000 additional citywide trips with 3,200 additional peak hour trips. So this is the maximum community development year 2030 that we look at and that the majority of our general plan looks at right now. So when we come into planning or needing to revise the general plan, we've already done an excellent job at projecting potential future community growth. I just would point out as a conclusion that our growth rates are well under the general plan projections. Obviously, the city's mature with moderating growth rates. We have infrastructure, but we need improvements as necessary to support that development, and that our infill and recycling can be accommodated with continued investment and improvement. So with that, we ask you to receive and file our wonderful presentation tonight.
Commissioner Goodman?
One quick question. So at a certain point, we're not going to be able to grow any more space unless we go up. So do we kind of know what how much we have available? I mean, you could say this, if you were maxed out, it feels like these numbers are probably before 2030. If you were completely built out, you might reach these numbers. You know what I'm saying? Unless you start going up.
Now, these numbers are actually based on a parcel by parcel analysis of the entire community. In assuming current height limitations and floor area ratios, there are all.
This much could be.
Then this much could be added.
So maybe the next 30 years you'd hit that ceiling.
You know, the trend over the years from 1970 forward has been down and less, and unless things were to turn around, you would reach a point where the community will, you know, when you say community will have no further growth or investment, there will always be change.
Right.
So, you know, who would have predicted the projects that I worked on are now being torn down?
Well, that's always going to happen.
You know, so there's always going to be some change.
Okay.
Commissioner Bureau?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are there little nuances in here, like R1 zoning allowing a 2 units on not 2 separate address units, but allowing like a second family quarter? It does not have those type of allowances in it.
No, this build out is based on existing zoning and existing development standards.
And there's no assumptions of any zone changes
Right.
on these conclusions. So there's the ability for that, but no.
There is, and we can't predict case by case, but from a broad brush city overall development potential, this is the best numbers you can get.
And the understanding of how much we have of industrial use and commercial use, is it based on FAR, or is it a separate number that the city tracks on how much land we have zoned per acre, and then how much actual square footage is issued from a building permit? Or is it just taking the zoning and FAR and we think we have that, but it's not measured?
Actually, both. You had it right the first time. The existing commercial and industrial square footage is from permit records and actual calculations. The potential square footage is the site area zoned by FAR to the maximum.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Rowe?
Yeah, I know you mentioned that, later on, in a few months, you'll be given some direction as far as whether you'll do a complete update or some minor ones. I was kind of curious, at least where I work, one of the fallacies or one of the risks of taking all your different components and assuming doom and gloom and adding them is the cumulative effect of the worst case usually is not rooted in reality. And I was wondering if what the impact would be, in terms of labor or resources, if you were to consider more of a, best case, worst case, and most likely, such that, you can better gauge, a range of how bad it could get. But, this is what I think it's going to be, and as time goes on, you can, you'll have an opportunity to have an off-ramp to, if you're assuming the worst and things aren't so bad, maybe you can take one of the lower, the less aggressive curves and implement, actions based on that. I was wondering if having, more of a risk-based plan would be more in line as opposed to assuming the worst and adding them.
It's a really good idea, and I think that just like phased mitigation is always more appropriate than kind of a draconian approach. The old approach was kind of just build the max and mitigate the max. It's a little more nuanced, and I think that we do need growth scenarios for best, worst, and most likely. Funny that the city actually does that in their budget process as well. So
Right.
yeah. So yeah, I think growth projections and ranges would be important, and we're going to look at that.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Mitchell?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, staff, for putting this together. It's enlightening. I wanted to take a step back. We live in Redondo Beach, and I know there's plenty of other cities that are in this great state of ours. And when they do this kind of work, do they use the same groups to get the numbers? U.S. Census, Caltrans, Institute of Traffic Engineers, your own, I mean, we've got, of course, numbers in here from Public Works and probably building and inspections, but am I missing any groups that I didn't name off that were in here that?
A couple. There are probably some other sources. Urban Land Institute studies very carefully growth and development impacts. So ULI would also have data. There have also been some very reputable studies, including the South Bay studies of centers and corridors by Solomar Research Group, followed up by the South Bay COG and AECOM as well, working on that information. But probably the most predictive tool out there is the city's actual traffic model that's been validated to be predictive of trips as far out as places like Barstow and Santa Clarita, and can tell you if a car is going to come from there and end up in Redondo Beach. So, I mean, that is a complex model, and so there's a lot more to this than just look up in a book.
True. But I mean, as far as being able to refer and work with the numbers that are given from these groups, I mean, it does seem like a comprehensive plan, and it is an outside perspective that has a lot of experience that is actually utilized as well in other cities, not just in California, but also throughout the whole country, I'm assuming.
Correct.
Commissioner Gann?
I don't mean to beat it, but I think you have to start considering the difference between an apartment and a condominium. And also, when you talk about Redondo, it's very difficult to come to these conclusions because in Redondo, the trips per day is in direct correlation to how far you live from the freeway. As an example, on my street, I know of 2 people who get up and drive someplace in the morning. And I know that that's different, but I mean, I think that the demographics and the way that people go from South Redondo versus North Redondo are totally different. But I'm more concerned, which I've mentioned all the time, is that we don't break down apartments versus condos, because I have practical experience in our neighborhood where we have very large apartment buildings and we have very large condominium buildings. And the traffic around the apartment building is substantially more than around the condominium building. And it's not a little bit, it's a lot. And I think that we just have to break those 2 types of housing units down. I don't know if we go single family, condominium, apartment. But I think it has a huge impact that we have to start trying to figure out how to keep track of.
Okay, that's a good point. We keep track of single-family and condo change and apartment change through our rental vacancy survey each year. And that's where, when you ask, could we do this? And I thought, yeah, we can, because we actually survey our rental units in the community. That information can be provided, Commissioner Gann.
Thank you.
Commissioner Goodman?
Well, just a thought that maybe it isn't so much apartments versus condos, but the density of the units. So if you have a lot more units packed into the same space, you're going to have a lot more families. You know what I'm saying? So you,
No,
so
I
you
hear-
probably
I
would
hear
see
what you're
more.
saying,
You would
but-
see more. No, I'm agreeing. You probably would see more traffic.
But I can tell you that if you put up a building with 50 condos in it, and you put a building next door with 50 apartments in it, my contention is the traffic in
It
the
could be.
apartment building is going to be substantially,
Because the people who live there are different type of family. Different,
I can't give you all the reasons,
Right.
but I mean, the difference in our neighborhood is dramatic. And not just in 1 and 2 buildings, but in that whole concept. And so I think that when we're talking about planning and building and that type of stuff, that we have to consciously say, is it an apartment? And that doesn't even include the moving in and out of apartments.
Right.
That's just daily traffic that goes back and forth, that it would be helpful. But I'm sure there's a survey someplace that proves me wrong, but.
There's probably one that proves you right also. So
All about statistics.
Yeah, that's interesting. One of the things that we haven't had in town, and I think the data, this number is not going to be accurate, because I remember, but we've had a net loss of about 380 some apartment rental units since we started tracking. I cannot remember the last apartment unit that was developed in town. So, and I
Want me to
just
tell you where
don't
they
know.
went? Go on Google and Google Airbnb Redondo Beach. It's gone from 62 to 270 in the last 6 months.
Commissioner Sanchez?
The trip generations and all this information, I'm curious, to use Commissioner Ung's terminology, do we ever consider, does the data ever look at vehicle size? Because I would think that would have some sort of, at least a perception of what is happening on the roadway, even though the trip counts may not reflect it. For example, a big SUV certainly seems like it lumbers more slowly than maybe, a Honda Civic, or it takes up more room going down the road, and there's appearance. Is there any data on that, or does that data even really, do you think it matters?
There isn't a differentiation in traffic count between passenger vehicle. We do have data on truck trips, and they do count more so towards daily trips than cars do, but we don't, and I don't know where I'd get that information, but it's
I'm
worth
just
looking at.
wondering, I would think of course, I could be wrong, an IF&M, an apartment building might have perhaps smaller vehicles. But again, it may not matter in the whole scheme of things. It's a curiosity.
But one thing interesting that he brings up is that during certain times of the day in South Redondo, a huge bunch of the traffic are small trucks and large trucks servicing the businesses that operate there. So when we put in a business, if a guy opens a business, we can't just contemplate trips by residential use. We have to contemplate trips per day by people servicing businesses. And if you go down there, it's pretty amazing, especially in between like 8 and 10:30 in the morning, the number of trucks coming back and forth to those businesses.
Yeah.
Really.
Anything further? Do we have a motion to receive and file?
Move to receive and file.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Number 9, item number 9, overview of mixed-use zoning. Do you have a presentation? Have to. Do we have a motion to open public
Doug.
comment? What?
Okay, certainly the public has a right to comment if we want to accept testimony on
Do we need to open
community
public?
growth and development. It's not a public hearing, so
Okay.
just invite the public up to
The
provide
public would
comment.
like to come up and comment. We're not taking action on it except receiving and filing, so.
That's what we like to do.
Always good to say hi. How you guys doing? It's been a month. So a couple things. I went through your report, and there's been a lot of talk on the RHNA numbers and the traffic, and we've had an increase of 8,000 people in the last 10, 15 years. I'm not sure, and then a little more than that, and we're averaging just over 5%, which is just over what the LA County growth is. And it's kind of hard for me to see how the traffic isn't going. So as part of the Save the Riviera, what we've done is actually talk to Caltrans and see how they do their traffic studies and their traffic counts.
Excuse me, not to interrupt, but could I ask just?
Timer?
if-
Oh, sure. Thanks.
Just need to keep it in orderly fashion, that's all.
Everyone, yeah.
Got
3
it,
minutes.
no worries. Caltrans doesn't actually do any actual counts anymore. They just do averages and they do guesstimates. That's all they do. They don't do any actual counts. That's very important to realize and think about. And they don't really see where traffic goes and comes from. They just kind of count at each individual intersection. I didn't see the 14 intersections that we talked about, and I would like to see those 14 intersections that need to be improved. And there's a lot of talk on the RHNA numbers in the city council meetings as well as meetings here in the past, and the expedient need that we need to fill these numbers, otherwise things would become bad for the city in terms of development and funding, so forth. So we did our own little digging, part of Save the Riviera here, and we found out, we talked to RHNA, and we found out from their August 2009 meeting that the city received the housing growth projections, and they being RHNA, did not have receive a separate survey submission from the city of Redondo Beach. So the city of Redondo Beach never gave them a survey submission. Per the regional council direction, SCAG staff accepted results from the local input process and did not change the input received. So meaning all those SCAG numbers that we hear about, that the 1,293 numbers that we got, and Manhattan Beach got 37, Hermosa 1, Lomita got in the 60s, I believe, RPV got 2. Those numbers were determined purely because of the numbers that we gave them, the information that we gave them. And there was a lot of discussion this last time that it's because of SCAG did their own research, And I just wanted to finish up by saying that that's not true at all. SCAG worked on the research that we gave them, the information that we gave them. Our representative came through and said, when asked in the August 19, 2009 meeting, they said that they asked if anyone checked these records, and the representative from Redondo Beach said, we are using our current housing element numbers, and the numbers look really close, which means we made our own projections, and we gave that to SCAG, and SCAG came back, and there was a large discussion back and forth, and said in the city council that we should or should not accept these numbers. The city council said that we were going to accept these numbers on the basis that we did not want to push back more, and that doesn't seem to be true. So I would like to, see if we could get those numbers, those SCAG numbers, and you guys do some more questioning and find out on those numbers, if we can bring those numbers down, because we shouldn't have to fulfill those numbers.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Amy Josephek. I'll save my mixed-use comment for after the mixed-use part, but I would say that the quote from the report that says, before public transportation and mass auto dependence, most cities were compact and walkable by necessity. Goods, services, and employment needed to be located close to residences. It was by necessity, but it became by culture. So your admirable goal is reducing distance between workplace and housing, yet there is a terrific lack of jobs in this part of the South Bay. Not only don't jobs exist here, but there's virtually no mass transit in this area. So other than telecommuting, which is a great idea and a lot of people are doing it, but the mass of people are not, and other than the possibility of telecommuting, how would new residents get to work? Right now, the only choice would be here by their own personal automobile. New housing tracts here would absolutely actually serve to increase the distance of a commute. And as for vehicle miles traveled and emissions and carbon footprints, those would all have to go up, otherwise people would not be allowed to would not be able to live here, because there is virtually no mass transit in this area of the city.
Thank you. Commissioner Gann?
I just wanted to mention on these RHNA numbers. The information that I've gotten is that the city of Redondo Beach has never appealed the RHNA numbers since they've been done, ever. And second of all, I keep hearing about these penalties to cities who don't meet their RHNA, but I can't find any record any place that shows any penalty any city's ever done for not meeting their RHNA guidelines. So, I mean, I understand, I'm sure that this RHNA is really important, but I don't get it. If you look at in the context of our RHNA number versus, well, here's Hermosa with 2, or something, it seems high. But if it's so high, I guess my question is, why have we never challenged it with RHNA? And we obviously haven't met the RHNA guidelines since forever. That would be a correct statement, wouldn't it? I mean, we've never met the RHNA guideline. Okay. Just accept that. Just accept what I say. We have never met the RHNA guideline, and yet there's been no lack of funding or penalty or fine or. So I don't know. All of a sudden, this RHNA thing has come up, and it's like a big deal. I mean, is it a big deal?
Regional housing needs allocation is set and defined for the next housing element cycle. We cannot change those numbers. Cities that have tried to change those numbers. There are several in the Central Valley area. The courts have refused to hear this, saying this is not a matter for judiciary interest. Our RHNA number is what it is, and the answer is never met. We've always met, because we have always provided the zone capacity to meet that RHNA number. So
Could you
have we
just
ever
give me an example of cities that have been
have we ever produced that number? No, but we're not required to produce that number. So let's be clear, RHNA is not a housing production requirement. It is a housing capacity plan. So there's a big difference between meeting RHNA and planning for RHNA.
But
So
the discussions that have been going on throughout the whole city and stuff. The people's perception of what RHNA is totally different than what you just said. Totally.
Yeah, I mean, we have the capacity
Okay.
for 3,700 units.
That's correct. And I suppose probably the best way to completely understand would be to actually read our city's housing element. It's online. Take a look at it.
Well, RHNA says 1,367. Let's say that we do 2. Does somebody come down here, some guys in a uniform, and arrest you or do something?
Because I think the common perception is that those units are going to be produced and will also fall within the income levels specified by Housing Community Development. What we would get in trouble for is gutting our housing capacity. Most recently, City of Huntington Beach has been sued now for reducing their development capacity
By who?
by housing rights advocate groups, for reducing their RHNA number below the planned capacity. Again, each project, each development gets considered on its own merits, but it's important that you differentiate between meeting RHNA, which we do, and producing housing, which
But the discussion
We
in the
don't.
community that's been going on now for the last few months is that, at least my perception is that people have begun to feel that this RHNA number means that the city of Redondo Beach, better come up with 1,390 units, and if they don't, there's going to be a penalty. Is that true?
what do you mean by come up, Commissioner Gann? Do you mean come up with building 1,392 units?
Yeah.
No, we don't have to produce those units.
Oh.
Do we have to zone for them? Yes.
But we can't downzone to
We
meet.
cannot downzone below those capacities.
Okay. The reason is from a lot of people that I talk to, a lot of people in our community have now been led to believe that the city had an obligation to come up with 1,300 or 1,400 housing units, and that's not the case.
Correct.
Okay, that's good to know.
So,
And the penalty? But what is this penalty
Well,
that happens?
I don't want to go through the potential penalties, but in the broader terms, loss of state funding, loss of state gas tax, there are many
And
penalties.
are there examples of that, just out of curiosity?
There are, and in fact, there are measures that can go so far as to impose development moratoriums, although that may be of interest to some.
Really?
So there you go. That's maybe a different discussion than we actually put on for tonight.
I understand what that
so
means.
I have a question, Aaron. So our current zoning, where does it fall in line with that? Is it above it? It obviously isn't below it. How?
Very unexacting numbers. We did put out exact numbers to the city council in a presentation with a factor of 30 or so % here. I think we've identified 2,000 plus units, 2,800 or more. I show 3,000 in there. So that's substantially less than our 1,300 and change requirement. So there's a surplus capacity in our zoning.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Marcy.
Good evening, everyone. I just want to say, I'd like to see.
Could we have
all-
the timer, sorry, please, thank you.
Good point.
Now I knew.
Just want to keep order here.
Yes. Okay, I would like to see all the traffic reports done by our city be posted on the city's website, so the public be knowledgeable about these numbers, how it works. Maybe there are some weaknesses that we can identify. And since those are done on a regular basis, it appears to me that it would be very beneficial to post them online. A couple of things about traffic, and Commissioner Sanchez and Gain brought them up, is the deliberate trucks that add to the traffic. It's the fire trucks that adds to the traffic. It's the police cars that constantly, from time to time, are going there. That also adds to the traffic, in addition to the other ones, okay? But it's not just the traffic what bothers me, it's the pollution that it creates. That's what bothers me the most. Whether it's a bus transportation that we're going to use, whatever we're going to use, is how it makes the air dirty. Go yourself, I invite yourself to go to PCH and Torrance, wear a white t-shirt, and stand there for a couple of hours during traffic hour. You will see how clean or how dirty your white t-shirt will become. I done it, okay? So all I'm trying to say is we need to keep our air clean. Not just say, well, you know, we are meeting our goals. That's not the point. The point is how much cleaner we're going to make it. What about the noise? The quality of life. I just read a report that people in Canada are selling bottles of clean air to China, $14 to $50 bottle of clean air. So, brings the point, what are we doing to make our air cleaner than it is now? Okay? I mean, maybe you want to make it even cleaner so we can sell that and make money out of it. Right? So how are we going to keep our air clean and our water clean as well? And another point I want to make is that, let me have it here, about the RHNA numbers. I spoke to somebody in Sacramento, and I was told that it is our leadership, local and the one in South Bay, that they need to work together to make sure that the numbers represent what the community wants, and also our local politicians. So please keep that in mind. And I talked in length, and so I know a lot about it. So please do what's on the best interest of the community,
Thank you,
which is,
Marcy.
you are part of that too. Thank you.
Good evening. Don't start the timer yet because I believe somebody has to give me administer the oath because I wasn't here at the beginning of the meeting. Do we have to do that?
It's not recorded.
Okay.
Don't worry about it.
Okay.
We trust you, Leslie.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners. Leslie Campeggi, Redondo Beach. I wanted to dovetail off of what Commissioner Gann just said because I want to thank you for saying what you said. Perception is reality. And when we use RHNA numbers as a basis to justify sanctioning development projects in this city that really shouldn't be sanctioned, I think that we do a disservice to the community. You haven't done that here as a body. I've heard it at the city council, and I've heard city staff state that we're not satisfying our RHNA numbers. Yet, Commissioner Gann, you pointed out that we've never challenged them, yet we as a city seem to use them as a basis for the development that we approve. And if that's not the case and we haven't challenged them, then I think that we need to go back and challenge those numbers rather than using it for a basis for development. I've often heard in city council meetings from city staff things like affordable housing when we add bonuses to density, and then I've heard affordable housing being defined as what the market will bear, which indeed makes it sometimes not affordable. So I think we have some conflicts here that are going on. City Council, Planning Commission, maybe the two aren't having the same things. I think we need to be on the same page. But if there's indeed no penalty for pushing back against those numbers, or not one that is able to be identified, save somebody up on the Central Coast maybe one time got challenged, I think we need to do a better job of communicating effectively within the governing bodies of this city and do the pushback and stop using RHNA numbers as a basis for development within this city and doing the pushback and doing the serious work that you guys are appointed to do. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So I believe we did a new housing element a number of months ago, 6 months or something like that. Correct? I can't recall when, but this year. And we discussed the RHNA numbers, and that's kind of why I don't remember everything, but I do remember the discussion there that they were really planning numbers. So I think, at least I remember it. But I think the point is, as long as I've been on this commission, we've never, ever used arena number. We've never had that discussion in the context of any development project. Now, the density bonus is a different thing altogether, correct me if I'm wrong. And that's a state mandate that has nothing to do with the number of units, but whether the allowable density if somebody agrees to build affordable housing. So that did come up in the Legato development, but we've never used arena numbers. I can't speak for the city council, but just wanted to clarify that.
And one further point, because I think there's a little other perception here. We've always challenged our arena number. In fact, between the last cycle and the current cycle, we almost reduced our number by 50% from the previous cycle. The arena process comes out with draft numbers. You're allowed to challenge, which we always do. And then if your challenge is accepted, your numbers revised, you have a further opportunity to appeal that allocation. We've never appealed because most appeals either result in the same number or, many cases, an additional number to the appellant. So we've always challenged, we've never appealed, just so people know that.
Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron. That was going to be my next question. Yeah.
Good evening. Pam Cumbar. I just want to say, it's all to realize that, studies are guidelines, but reality is the proof when you get right down to it. Traffic's only one component of growth. The other component, is population. I mean, they're relative, but they are two different components. Do we really have to keep growing in units and residents and numbers to be prosperous? And the density and population, again, I guess this is a repeat of what I just said. Density and population is not just traffic. Redondo Beach is a destination point for people visiting, and that does make the density more than just residents. And that's just something to keep in mind, because there is a lot of plans here to increase the Redondo Beach as a destination point with Center Cow. And it's not just the number of residents here. It's going to be a lot more than that. Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. My name is Pete Varenkoff, 40-year resident of 90277. I just wanted to make one comment on the arena topic. When we do have a surplus, as Mr. Jones has indicated, in our arena numbers, and the issue has really to do, again, with the higher density properties, the mixed use, CR, MU properties, and those are carrying zoning at 35 units, development units per acre, as you're aware. When we go in with arena numbers, we only use 28. We factor that down. Not only do we identify that we have a surplus of zoning to meet the arena numbers, we only use 28 dwelling units per acre, not 35, which we actually have zoned. So again, we qualify with RHNA with using 28, and then we allow developers to go in at 35, and that doesn't seem to make much sense. I mean, the alignment there, and that I think has got the residents a little bit concerned. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I don't really understand the relationship there.
Okay, a component of the housing element, and if I get too far in the weeds, is called the sites analysis, where you look at all properties that are potentially available for change. The State Housing Department of Community Development housing element guidelines require you to not use the maximum development, but use a historic or reasonable development number for those sites. So even if they're zoned for 35, they're only going to let you put those into your sites analysis at about the density that other projects have developed. That's a good point.
So that's the reason.
That's the reason is,
for
is
that
that
from the
those
city's
are the,
standpoint.
that's the state law
Okay.
with respect to
Okay.
housing element compliance.
Okay, thanks. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is John Alpe. I'm an aerospace engineer. I'm retired right now from NASA. I used to work for TRW and Aerospace Corporation. I'm very familiar with the traffic patterns because I've been in here since 1982. There are many reasons why the traffic is bad, and beach traffic is one of them, aerospace engineering traffic, airport traffic, but worst of all is the through traffic. You know, technology exists. You know, police departments, intelligence agencies scan all the license plates. Look, using the registration, you can see where these cars are originating at, and then maybe you'll have more realistic origin destination studies. And what I would like to say, you have to keep in mind that before anything else, development should keep in mind the quality of life in the area. We don't want to turn this into a Manhattan, downtown New York, or Chicago, or San Francisco. This is Redondo Beach. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. First of all, I'd really like to say thank you to every single one of you.
It's Susan
for
Rennick, right?
Yes, it is. I apologize. I thought you knew me by now. Susan Rennick. Every single one of you for your patience, your forbearance, because you go through a lot, because I've seen it from here, and I'm not here every time. Tonight, I heard a lot of very astute questions, interest, deep thinking about it, and I just so appreciate that. I want to say thank you first.
Excuse me, could you say that again?
Sure.
And we'd like to come back every meeting.
To look at. Yeah, you bet.
We'd be happy.
And the trucks and service commercial, I mean, really, all of you have asked some really great questions, and I love to hear them. As far as the traffic measurements, I want to kind of tell you, when I know it's a tennis match, but when I have to get on Pacific Coast Highway anytime between 7 and 9 in the morning and go north to Manhattan Beach, I get off of Pacific Coast Highway as fast as possible, and I'll take Prospect, or I'll take Ardmore, I'll take Aviation. I'll get off of it immediately because I know perfectly well I'm not going to get there in time unless I allow an hour and 15 minutes. That's a lot of time. What I'm asking or considering or asking you to consider is the measurement of these side streets. Now, I know we're doing traffic studies on PCH, but does that take into consideration all of those people who scatter out into the side streets because they know better, they know how to get around it? Can we do traffic studies to say the increase in all the side streets that would happen?
That's
Okay.
interesting that you say that, because the traffic, every time we put in speed humps, the street next door that doesn't have them,
Yeah.
traffic goes through the roof.
Absolutely. I mean, we all learn pretty quickly. We avoid PCH and PV Boulevard intersection like the plague, and I live right there. The RHNA numbers, I just wanted to comment, wouldn't it be better to conserve some of our zoning instead of use it up? Am I understanding that correctly? Because if we use up the zoning that we have available, wouldn't that be to our detriment? So I kind of wanted to throw that in there because that's how it looked to me. And the water situation, if we do have a continuing drought, are we going to dig ourselves in a hole where we really can't manage our water because we're already cutting back so much? Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks.
Well, I think that the traffic thing is something that a lot of people who live in South Redondo live by the 10 to 2 rule.
Yeah.
Is it, you know, we don't leave before 10 and we get home by 2. You know, otherwise, it's not, whatever you had planned isn't worth doing.
I know it's a lot colder right now, but there's been a few times here in the last month that I've actually gotten on my bike and gotten up north to the South Bay, north part of South Bay pretty quick. But, I mean, yeah, we sometimes don't have that.
Well, you raise a good point. The one bus, is it?
438, there's seven
It's
of them,
like a
and they're
big
jam-packed.
It's a big bus. It's
Yeah.
a special bus. That thing is packed.
Yeah.
I mean, on Catalina and Avenue F in the morning, there's a line of people trying to get on.
There's 7 of them that come through in the morning and 7 at night, and it goes up to downtown and back. And, yeah, I've taken it probably 5 times in the last week and a half to do projects downtown, and it's really a beautiful thing, and I'm glad we have it, because when people learn about it, people are listening right now at home, yeah, it's a great thing. And then you've got the 232 bus. People don't even realize that they have that opportunity to take to LAX and back. I mean, it's $1.75, and it goes right up PCH, and it gets you to, Sepulveda and Century in 20-25 minutes.
How long's
Not
the-
between
how
7
long's
and
the
9.
downtown trip?
Downtown trip takes about 50 minutes from the pier.
Really?
50 to 55 minutes from the pier to 7th and Figueroa, because you're in the bus lane the whole time once you get to Dockweiler. So
Really good. I bet you many people, I certainly did not know that.
$2.50 one way. Yeah.
It's a little bit cheaper for us senior citizens.
Hopefully someday, God willing.
Come with me, I'll get you a better deal.
Okay,
I had no idea.
item number 9? Did you have a?
Thank the commission for your input. We have detailed notes on a lot of good topics for us to address, both as we move forward with a general plan discussion. So this is very helpful, and thanks to the community for weighing in as well. Coming up next.
We are.
We are.
This is item number 9, mixed use.
I'm gonna work on the projector for you, though.
God, I really lost. Pretty way past my time.
Is it working, Aaron?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Planning Commission. I think I'll just go ahead and get started. I've handed out a set of slides that we were going to present tonight, but technical difficulties have precluded that. So hopefully we can all follow along with the slides as I go through it. And similar to that last discussion, it is a discussion item, so if something comes up as we start to talk about it, you have a question, please, through the chairman, stop me, and we can get into the issues and take some notes and get into the details. So with that, thank you very much. Good evening. This is new business discussion item number 9. It's an overview and discussion of mixed-use zoning districts, development policies, regulations, and standards. We might actually have something going here, but we'll keep going anyway. So the item before you tonight, it has quite a bit of detail. The staff report has a lot of information. Mixed-use development here in Redondo Beach, and really as a planning issue, has a pretty rich history. So there's a lot to talk about. This came before us tonight as part of, if you go to the second slide, as part of a recent adoption by the City Council, a strategic plan objective, which Aaron alluded to earlier. Really, this is a subset of the pending general plan update discussion that the council wants to address and wants to look at closely. And as a targeted element of that, look at mixed-use development, and is there a need to amend the development standards for mixed-use development here in Redondo Beach? So they just adopted that strategic plan objective on October 14th, a couple of months ago. So tonight, if you go to slide 3 here, we're going to walk through mixed-use development, and as was the report, the way we laid it out in the report was a series of questions. And this is to provide a broad overview of mixed use in the policies and the development standards, and then drill down into, what are the development standards and what do we want to do, if anything, to those development standards. So the questions that the staff report detailed were, what is mixed use? What are the various types of mixed use? Why do we have mixed use in Redondo Beach? Where is it allowed? What is the rationale for these locations? What are the existing policies and standards for mixed use development? And we'll spend the most of the time there. We'll kind of run through some of the historical elements of it, but then get into what our general plan has to say and our current zoning standards. And then also just some of the planning commissioners may have been involved with the 2010, 2011 effort. And I did a lot of research on it, preparing for tonight's presentation. And there was a very in-depth analysis conducted at that time. And as a result of that, there were some pretty significant changes made to mixed-use development regulations. So we'll quickly review those. And then really I guess the goal of tonight's presentation and discussion is to find out from the Planning Commission if there's particular areas you want us to focus on as we prepare or not some amendments to the current standards that we would bring back to you next month. So jumping into slide 4, what is mixed-use development? And really it has a long history, hundreds of years. That's how areas grew naturally. There wasn't a dependence on the automobile or mass transit, so really you had to live, work, and eat in proximity, in a reasonable proximity to each other. So everything was developed very closely together. You had your homes, your business, and your workplace all within a reasonable distance. And Redondo was very much like that. It was the origins of Redondo Beach. It was a port city, and it had a vibrant mixed-use village downtown with shops, services, and residents centered on the harbor, and it was about a 2 to 3 story format. So the next slide, I'm kind of glad not everybody can see it. It says demise of mixed use. Really, it was a combination of so many things. The Industrial Revolution, when the automobile became our primary mode of transportation, public transportation as well, and it really drove a lot of different variables all together at the same time, which created the impetus for single-use zoning, separate uses, and a separation of uses. So as you intensified your commercial and your manufacturing development, you then created very difficult neighbors for your residences. So there was a move away from commercial development and industrial development. And then you had the automobile, which further supported that. So then you had what we call sprawl that just occurred over the next 20, 30 years. And then with the population boom after World War II, all that vacant land was just turned into housing tracts. Then that's where the residents lived. So the commercial retailers knew that, so they started moving their commercial out there, and through that process you really eroded that downtown. And so that's the development pattern that pretty much all the cities followed, and that's what we have as a predominant development pattern here in Redondo Beach. So now we're looking at that again, and it was looked at really closely, and we'll go into those policies in a minute. But if you go to slide 6, we have a slide that says what are the types of mixed-use development, and I'll just briefly, there's a few listed on that slide. There's I think 13 different types listed in the staff report, but there's not just one type of mixed use. There's a lot of different types. There's where you have the neighborhood commercial, a convenience store in a residential neighborhood. That's a type of mixed use. You've got office and convenience and office residential mixes. It's a vertical style of mixed use, and that's also village clusters. You've got horizontal and vertical. So and we've got examples here in the city of Redondo Beach of that. So what we did, and I pulled this research from what was done in 2010 and 2011, and it was very interesting, and it's common in the planning and zoning process when you're trying to look at these things. You look around and you say, what did this city do and what did that city do? So that was done. Quite a number of jurisdictions with mixed-use zoning regulations were looked at in 2010 and 11. And that table on slide 7 is a summary of that. And basically it's there to just point out that our current mixed-use development standards and policies are very in line and consistent with what other communities and jurisdictions throughout the state have adopted. It might be interesting to take another look at that again. Maybe things have changed since 2010. Some other cities have adopted newer regulations that we could look at as we move this process forward and see if we're still in line with the predominant thinking and development patterns and densities that are recognized by other jurisdictions. So,
Commissioner Ross?
yeah.
Yeah, I had a question because a number of them have no standards set. And I was wondering, what exactly does that mean? And you know, does that mean that they can stuff as much as they want and without any sort of illegality?
Not necessarily. It just may mean that they don't regulate that aspect of the development. For example, if you look at the city of Hermosa Beach, number of stories allowed versus building height, they just have a building height regulation. They don't stipulate the storage. So it's a level of detail.
Okay, so essentially, it would be limited by the square footage of your area and 30 feet. So you can have a big giant box, and whatever you can put in there
Correct.
would be fair game.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. Yes, this is taking it to a level of detail, and some jurisdictions just don't do that.
Okay.
So why do we have, on the next slide, slide 8, why do we have mixed-use development? And it was very interesting when I went in and looked at the general plan, the 1992 general plan update where mixed-use development was introduced here. It was very specific as to why every location where we have mixed-use development, why we were trying to propose it or why it was being adopted. And the predominant rationale was to revitalize underperforming commercial at key nodes close to shops and services, as well as areas served by transit. And then another reason stated in a lot of the documents was to protect R1 and R2 from upzoning that may otherwise be required pursuant to state housing laws. So those two were really the predominant drivers for mixed-use development. There's a number of other considerations as well. I'll just run through just a couple. Providing a greater housing variety and density, more affordable housing potentially. Reducing distances between housing, workplaces, retail businesses, and other amenities and destinations. And improving access to fresh, healthy foods at farmers markets that you could access by foot and by transit. And then allowing more compact development and creating some land use synergies. So where is mixed use allowed? And again, it's really targeted here in Redondo Beach. There's 7 locations within the city where it's permitted. And there are 4 primary mixed use areas and 2 sub areas. That only adds up to 6. The 7th is the Galleria. It's not actually designated. It doesn't have a land use designation of mixed use, but it does have policies within the commercial regional policies and zoning standards that allow for mixed use, for residential and mixed use. So the next slides, just we illustrate the zoning map, have a photograph that shows examples of what's there now, and we do that for each of the separate areas, and I can't do that now, so we'll just kind of walk through that. And we'll get into, if you skip ahead to the existing general plan policies, goals, objectives, and policies for mixed-use development on slide 15. And this is where, in our general plan, and it's somewhat unique. I've looked at a lot of general plans, and the level of specificity and detail in our general plan with respect to this land use really bears how much analysis and effort was targeted and research in order to be very thoughtful and appropriate with mixed use here in the city. This first area is the Artesia Boulevard. It's the Artesia Boulevard corridor, sub-area 3, mixed use corridor, Blossom to west, between Blossom and west of Flagler Lane. It's a MU1 designation. And this is one of only 2 of the mixed use areas that has an option for residential development only. The objective here was very clear, and this segment of Artesia Boulevard was designated for mixed use primarily because it is in substantial need of revitalization. and mixed use is viewed as a viable means of achieving this. Within this area only, or actually there's another too, but an option has also been provided for strictly residential development, provided that the entire side of block is developed for this use. This is intended to provide yet another option for revitalization of the area. So in this particular case, it was mixed use and residential only, just to really incentivize getting some revitalization in that part of Artesia Boulevard. The second area is Pacific Coast Highway, sub-area 1. This is the node between Palos Verdes, south of Palos Verdes Boulevard on the, I guess, north but east side of Pacific Coast Highway. So this area, Pacific Coast Highway, and it goes at length in the general plan about it, is South Redondo's main commercial street and north-south artery. Previously, almost the entire length of Pacific Coast Highway was under one commercial zoning designation. In the development of the general plan, one of the objectives for Pacific Coast Highway was to differentiate the sections of the corridor in terms of both the types and intensities of uses. The intent of this strategy was to provide aesthetic relief and contrast along this long linear corridor and to enhance the economic vitality of the corridor by breaking up the supply of land for different uses. So there was actually an economic study prepared for the general plan that showed that there was too much commercial development capacity in relation to forecasted demand. So by changing some of the portions of Pacific Coast Highway to multiple family residential, this creates a better balance between the supply of land and the economic demand for commercial and residential uses. That area is also known as MU3, and it has an MU3A zoning category. The third area is Pacific Coast Highway. Again, this is the node at the Torrance Boulevard intersection. Pacific Coast Highway, and there was strategic language here as well. Pacific Coast Highway and Torrance Boulevard is the most prominent and highly trafficked intersection in South Redondo. Taking advantage of this area was designed for mixed use to make this location into a focal point of activity within South Redondo. Special attention will be given to encourage the type and design of uses that will make this area distinctive in terms of both appearance and activity. I had an exhibit here that showed some schematics, some land use concepts there that are contained within the general plan, but we can't see those. So moving on to slide 19, area 4, Pacific Coast Highway. This is this very small piece. It's right across the street. It's intended to play off the civic center that we have here. So this is an intensification of land use that is just immediately adjacent to a civic center, and it's intended to allow for higher intensity commercial and residential uses that would complement the activity of the civic center. So that's a very small piece. The fifth area is Riviera Village. It's identified in the general plan as a peripheral frontage Avenue I sub-area. It has a MU3 designation. And we all are very familiar with Riviera Village and the concepts there, the village character. The intent of the current general plan is to preserve and enhance the character of Riviera Village by reinforcing the existing scale of development and style and design. Despite its overall village character, though, portions of the village do feature differences in orientation and intensity of development. The general plan went on and it broke down 4 sub-areas, and mixed use is just one of these 4 sub-areas that are called out as planned and preferred for the village area. The North Catalina, number 6, this is the 6th area. This is the sub-area 3 of North Catalina Avenue corridor, and it's the Salvation Army site. And the standards there are essentially reflect what's there now, and that we're hopeful is maintained by the Salvation Army. So there's not too much more to say on that. And then the last one, it is the 7th area that we allow mixed-use development, although it doesn't have a land use designation as such. And that's the Galleria at South Bay. And similarly to the vision for Artesia Boulevard, mixed use is introduced to the Galleria as a way. There's a number of reasons, but one of them is just to open up the development opportunities for revitalization and a reinvention, if you will, of the Galleria. And that's happening right now. There's application and work being done to revitalize the Galleria. There's also, as Commissioner Mitchell pointed out in our last discussion, the mass transit green line plan for adjacent to the Galleria, which lends itself to high density residential very nicely. So moving to the next slide, this is when we get into the actual development standards, and they're very, when you write them all out, they're almost identical, but there's little differences for each one of these areas. So I laid it out in a table starting on slide 23. So you could see how each of the development standards that we have is applied to each of the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 zoning categories. We have the FAR commercial, and it changes for each one of these areas. I mean, there's some standards that go across a few of the zones, but this table here are the development standards that we're looking to you tonight to provide some feedback on, and hopefully the benefit of having it in a table format side by side will give you help you give some clarity as we go through it. The next slide, here's height and stories. So the slide on page 24 breaks down the building height allowed for commercial only, the building height for mixed use projects, the building height for residential, and then from there it's stories for commercial and stories for mixed use and stories for residential. And they vary for building height for commercial only. If you were to develop that, for all of the zoning categories it's 30 feet, except for the MU3C, it's 45, which is our village property. And that's mainly because there's office spaces, tall office spaces as part of the development down in the village already. And then the Galleria site, the CR zone. The building heights for mixed use range from 38 to 45 for pretty much all of the different categories. The building height for residential is the same, if it even allows residential only. Some of the mixed-use zoning categories do not allow residential only, and they're called out in the table. The stories range from 2 stories to 4 stories. 4 stories is only in the commercial regional at the Galleria. The rest are 2 and 3 stories. Then there's various setback standards, front setback minimums, maximums, side setbacks, rear setbacks. They vary. There's consistency generally with the various mixed-use zoning categories, but then there's slight changes for each one of these depending on which area it's in. Second-story setbacks are common. Third-story setbacks, if they're permitted, are also common. Again, we're trying to break up the mass of the structure, and these standards would drive that. Now, this table here on page 26 is interesting, and I'll get into it in just a couple of slides, but it shows outdoor living space requirements and particularly usable public open space requirements. That was not a feature of the original mixed-use development standards when it was first adopted. The usable public open space requirement came into play or was adopted as part of the 2010-2011 update. Then you'll notice a lot of the general regulations, parking regulations, sign regulations, landscaping procedures. Those all refer to just standard existing development standards in the municipal code. So let's see, the slide on page 27, when were the mixed-use development regulations and standards amended and for what reason? As I stated, as I got into started the presentation, the general plan land use element was really specific, really detailed, and very targeted for each of these areas where we have these locations where we have mixed use. And it had basically zoning regulations were the policies in our general plan. Since its original adoption, really there's been very minor changes, if any, to the general plan. Very, very few policy changes have been made to those original 1992 standards or policies. Then we go to the zoning ordinance amendments that have occurred since that original adoption. I think that the zoning standards came in, or the zoning development regulations were actually adopted about 96. It took about 4 years or so to get those all through as part of a larger effort. But there was quite a bit of analysis of the zoning regulations that was conducted in 2010 and 11. And as a result of that thorough investigation and examination, there were some fairly significant amendments to the code. And they're outlined on the next few slides. And just a summary of them, there were specific purposes that were added. And this, I thought this was an interesting purpose that was added in 2010, and it states that as one of the purposes for mixed-use zoning, the primary character of mixed use should be commercial. That's one of the specific purposes that were added. Also, another specific purpose that was added was public open space requirements were also implemented and noted in the purposes. Hotels were also added as a conditionally permitted use. Offices were, as a result of some, due to the high vacancy rate of commercial uses on the ground floor, the previous restrictions were changed to allow up to 50% of the ground floor frontage commercial space to be developed with office.
Commissioner Goodman has a question.
So the point about primary character being commercial, what's the meaning or intent? What does character mean? What it looks, or the amount of space, or?
You know, Aaron might have a little, certainly more history on it and could speak to it as he lived that amendment.
The in the 2010, 2011 amendments, there had been community concern expressed that mixed use was an excuse for residential development. And we wanted to have the ability for the commission, council, through the entitlement process, to look at a project and to determine whether or not that development, had a character of a residential site in its entirety, or was it conveying a more commercial, retail commercial and/or retail office commercial character. So it's not as specific, and the commission may want to go further with that discussion about making a mixed-use project more commercial, perhaps downplaying the appearance of a residential development entirely. So those are the kind of amendments. That's why that was added, to make.
But is that the statement? The primary character. There are no numbers. There's no. It's completely objective. I read that way.
Or subjective. Yeah.
Subjective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thank you. Is that the way it is actually stated?
That's a general plan policy. Now, there is not a zoning standard to go with that policy, other than there's a minimum amount of commercial required in a mixed-use development. So that's.
And the ones I've seen, the ones that have come before the panel when I've been here, I didn't even really know this existed, and certainly there are a couple of cases where that wasn't the primary character.
Right, and the opinions have ranged from community input from it should be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, retail, office, and residential. That necessarily isn't always possible, but in adopting or updating the mixed-use standards, we can come back to the commission with some options for zone changes to implement some of that, if that's the desire of the commission.
One of the things you want to do is there are all these reasons to have mixed use, and then you toss this primary character thing in, and does that even fit with the reasons that you want mixed use? I'm not saying it does or doesn't, but I think you want to look at these
Okay.
together so that your overall objectives and the more detailed things are consistent. Thank you.
Yeah. Great, thank you.
Commissioner Bureau?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think it'll be helpful the day when this comes forward to have a couple numbers in front. Total area of the city is about 6.7 square miles.
6.3.
6.3. And in our total area of land use for mixed-use projects, where are we, you think?
We'll get back to you on it.
Yeah.
About 2 acres? Well, no, I think Galleria Mall would be the biggest one. A couple acres there, but
We'll provide area.
certainly at less than about a tenth or a fraction of a tenth of the city.
I don't want to throw anything out.
Okay, no, and so then that tiny little fraction of the city, then the equivalent, the units, square footage of commercial space, total units currently zoned, and the impact of reducing or making anything to that and what that does, because even though it's a small area relative to the square total area of the city, it contains a significant punch on total units. And any changes to that, it affects unit count on the different places and total build out.
We'll absolutely provide that, and we need to do that for RHNA and every other land use analysis purpose. So, good point. I also mentioned, did we talk about minimum lot size yet? I don't think we did.
No, we have not.
But that's another factor. This commission had recommended to the council that we actually, to encourage smaller mixed-use developments, that we actually allow mixed use on sites as small as 15,000 square feet. There's a minimum lot size of 15,000 to even consider a mixed-use project. There was pushback and challenge from the community that would result in additional units. To Commissioner's Bureau point, in the aggregate, citywide, it couldn't because there's only so much land at such a density. But there was a challenge that if you allow it on smaller lots, you're going to get more of it. You can look at this two ways. I leave it to the commission to see if you want to, again, consider smaller lot mixed-use development. It's an important thing. On Avenue I, you have a project that's 12 units above a shops, and most people say, hey, that seems really nice. We only allow it on larger sites, so.
No, and I've tried to work on projects with zero lot line, 2,000 square foot lots, which is a very nice product type. It's not tested in the South Bay. It's been tested in other places. So I think as new ideas and new product type that's being developed all over the country can get put in as options, because there is good looking 2,000 square, I mean, it's not for everybody, and not every product type is for everyone. Not everyone is going to want to live in that, but it's a different product type that in high per square foot land cost makes sense. And I don't know if this is I'll talk about basements later, but that's it for now.
Commissioner Rao?
Yeah, I just wanted to get clarification. I'm looking on chart 23. Now, it was clear that the mixed use cannot be all residential. But I'm assuming by the first line, the FAR commercial, that these could be 100% commercial. And so those are the FARs, if someone chose to have 100% commercial, where the mixed use number would be, if the decision is made to have a combination of both, greater than 0.7 has to be residential with a total of 1.5. So it almost seems like the guidelines are kind of stacked and giving the developer an incentive to do both, because they can pack a little bit more in. And I was kind of curious whether that was done by design, that gee, if you don't give them something, they won't do it, or because it just seems to me that land is in such short supply, and here in Redondo Beach, it's so much in demand that you wouldn't need to provide those incentives to do the right thing, especially if there seems to be a greater profit element in building the residential. You wouldn't need to have those additional incentives, such that when the two are combined, it actually is greater than, what it might be if it was just commercial.
That's a good point. Part of that was, in fact, to encourage and/or help promote mixed-use development. The other part was that by design, the current code allows two-story commercial limitation. I'll just say for general discussion, but allows 3 stories for mixed-use development. With that, it would make there needed to be an increase in the FAR to correspond to the number of stories. So it was both an incentive, but also a design decision that you needed a higher FAR to achieve that number of stories. So
only to the extent that you wanted the ground covered with building.
Understood. And again, a lot of standards borrowed from other communities. We are now seeing that other communities do have, there's a lot of 1.5 FARs. There are some 1.0s, and that's would come back. The commission at our next discussion on mixed use, which will be probably an advertised public hearing, will have a range of discussions on what's an appropriate FAR for mixed use, and so you don't want a development standard that says you've got a 65 or 85 foot building height but allow an FAR of 0.5. It just, the two don't go together. 1.5 tends to go with 3 stories.
Or you could have some option where if you had something that was a little more restrictive in one area, you could get, let's say, an FAR bonus. Something like that. If you had fewer units, you could make them bigger, something like that.
Okay.
Right. I mean, there's always those. I noticed the one for San Clemente had a bonus, so it kind of piqued my interest of what the bonus would have been or how you achieved it. But you could always, say, fewer units, you can have a bigger, FAR or something like that.
There's another standard that I don't think we touched on our presentation, but we are going to be asking the commission to consider some recommendations on some numerical design restrictions. This will affect FAR, it will affect building mass, it will affect the scale of development, and it will greatly affect how the buildings are articulated, how many planes they have. We attached an example of a comparative analysis of mass, bulk, and scale. One of the things that we want the commission to have the tool of is the ability to say quantitatively that a design standard is not met. So look forward to a discussion of quantitative design regulation rather than a qualitative design regulation at our next meeting. Those numbers make it a lot easier to have specific, quantifiable, objective standards.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Gann?
I think as we move forward and discuss the term commercial, and I assume that commercial means retail or office space, that we have to break it down because the retail environment in this country has changed dramatically since 1992. And the type of businesses that can survive, can't survive today, that were quite before. And I think one of the things is we go down Pacific Coast Highway and we see all these buildings that were built in 1952. And some of them a whole block long is empty. And to do that, and I just think that we have to draw a line between office space And we have to identify if we're looking for retail, because I think the whole retail business has changed so much for almost everybody. You know, that our anticipation of retail and retail tax revenue generation is might be way too optimistic than what it truly is, and our world hasn't changed. I mean, it seems to me that the Amazon guy is on our street. He lives there, and he's bringing boxes in and everything else. So I mean, it's just I just think that we have to really think about the term retail and what it really going to bring to the table in the future.
Restaurants. That's what survived. Restaurants. I mean, you're absolutely right. The other thing is not only the online nature, but shopping centers. I mean, we're just seeing that like crazy as these things.
Well, I don't know. Wherever you shop now, it doesn't matter if it's a small beauty supply business in Riviera Village, and you know what's going on when the people are looking in front of the bottle of shampoo with their iPhone.
Exactly.
You know, and they're doing. It's just a different world, and I happen to know some people in the retail business, and they to them the shift has been so dramatic that it's that a lot of them have survived because they do it. But I just think if we're in our longer term planning, I think that our outlook for retail and the money that it generates from tax revenue might be a little too optimistic.
Yeah, we are absolutely seeing that shift and are focusing on new formats and new opportunities for retail that works.
But that just raises a question. A lot of these online people are now paying taxes. It's quite easy for the city of Redondo Beach to identify their share of the tax revenue when somebody at the beauty supply store down in Redondo sells some shampoo. But when somebody buys shampoo from Amazon and pays tax, what does the city do to identify that revenue that belongs to them?
We hire a sales tax consultant, HDL Corn & Cohn, who does annual audits, or actually quarterly, almost continual audits, of our taxable sales through what's called the unitary tax pool. Our unitary taxes have been going through the roof. These are the Amazons, the things, and they're making sure that the point of sale is correctly assigned in our unitary tax pool distribution. Our sales tax numbers are only up slightly, just a few percent, but our unitary, which are the distributed taxes, go up substantially. And they do a job under an incentive-based contract where they're paid up to the first dollar amount that they find as misallocated taxes, and from there on is to the city, and we do very well with it.
Thank you.
Commissioner Mitchell?
So I'm hearing a lot of things, and I just thought I should remind everybody in the room and people watching on TV that this country now has 77 million baby boomers. We've got 86 million millennials, people born between 1980 and 2000. I don't know if there's a millennial in this room. That's a lot of people.
Right here.
Our friends from
Mr. Mendez, yes. Sorry.
More. We have two.
He's got an Uber car waiting for him out front.
laptop on is.
But the reason why I bring this up is because we're talking about why we're looking at these changes. We're looking at trends. We look at demand, and we see what's happening throughout the country, right? Residential use, I mean, in the 1970s, I think the average square home was 1,200 square feet. Today, it's maybe quite close to double that. You kidding me? I live in a 1,200 square foot house, and I'm happy, very happy. And you know what? I'm getting to it, and I'll just say it now. I was at a symposium with the Vice Mayor of London, and they are putting on the books laws that disallow units to be any smaller than 200 square feet. We're going in that direction. I know it's happening. It's pretty amazing, but do we punish this generation for being minimalists? I mean, call me a progressive because I am one. I don't think so.
Well, how do their parents get them out of the basement?
Well, that goes back to the restaurants.
If you don't supply a place for them to live in, they're going to stay home.
Like
forever.
Commissioner Goodman said, the restaurants, right? You feed them. No, but I mean, we're looking for a reduction of VMT. I think it's better for all of us, as Marcy was saying. I mean, you got all these people that are, if we got them out of their cars, we would be in a much better place. So, you know, when Aaron was talking about, you know, considering this notion of looking at these lots, you know, the minimum of 15,000. I think we should look at it. I mean, it's something that we're going to have to do. And I know that you've got this green line that's going to be going behind that Target. It's going to be connecting to Old Town Torrance. It's happening. It's going to be here soon. And think of all the people, North Redondo, South Redondo, that live in our neighborhoods, that work up near El Segundo. They don't have to drive anymore. It's going to be phenomenal. You want to go into Mid-City, LA? You take the green line and you get off, and then you take the Crenshaw line. That thing's going to be here before you know it, too. And you can get up there pretty quick. I mean, there's things happening in and around us that are coming, and it's helpful to have for this generation and for all of us, for that matter. Because as we get older, heck, my parents just downsized into smaller units to be able to be near public transit. So I think there's things that we have to, I mean, when we're looking at the whole thing and we're looking at how people are looking to live, we have to take that into consideration. And some of us aren't in that age bracket. Boy, I sure as hell wish I was.
Really?
But we have to take all that into consideration because we are changing for hopefully the better. Because I'm telling you, when we have 90% of our pollution coming from mobile sources, that's too much. And maybe it's because I lived in Denmark too long. So many people on bikes over there, so many people, such less pollution. And, you know, we have to have a place that we can live where we don't have to rely on automobiles. And boy, if we can get that air to be better of quality, it's going to be better for all of us. So listen, there's a lot of things here that are I think important for us to keep in mind. I mean, we got so many great things that have been laid out here, and we have to continue the conversation with the community, and we have to think about all these things, because in the end, we have to make this place better. And is change easy? No. Ask my wife. I sometimes don't like change, but it's here and we got to do it, and we just have to be as constructive as we can about it. So I applaud the staff for this report, and I appreciate the conversation that we're having.
Okay. All right, so we can pick it back up here, and really, you know, as we're talking about all these issues, it's important to note that this body recently, within the last 4 or 5 years, went through this exercise and really honed down. And I was going through those various zoning ordinance amendments that occurred when we segued into the discussions we just had. And I'll pick it up from where I left off. Residential density. That was, obviously a huge issue that the Planning Commission wrestled with, and as a result, they're actually currently right now, and the way it was originally adopted, it's 35 dwelling units per acre. Due to concerns raised by the public and the Planning Commissioners, traffic and parking in 2010, the Planning Commission proposed reductions to 1 unit per, it equates to changing it down to 30 dwelling units per acre from 35. Now, the City Council did not support the recommendation to reduce residential densities as part of the final approval, so they therefore remain 35 dwelling units per acre. And
let me correct that.
Yeah.
The City Council did support the reduction in density to 30 units, but did not support the requirement for paying for an Article 27 public election to accomplish that reduction under our charter, Article 27, at a cost of about $180,000. So supported, but not adopted.
Yeah. Thank you, Aaron.
Did you say supported but not adopted? I learned so much here once.
So to be clear, any change that we do make to density would trigger the need for an election on the matter. So then
That's
move.
Proposition DD, right?
No,
No?
But you'd still have to have an election.
correct.
So it's right back to where it was when it was supported but not adopted.
That's correct.
Correct. And then the other category that you guys were talking about in detail was minimum lot size. And currently the standard states no project containing both commercial and residential uses shall be permitted on a lot less than 15,000 square feet. And I think in the report we say that there are provisions that allow for the Planning Commission to permit mixed use on smaller lots, but in my research that doesn't exist. So it's still a 15,000 square foot lot minimum, and that's something we've talked about reducing to allow more, mixed use to develop on some of these smaller lots that we have. And we've got quite a few examples. Some of the photos that we have along Pacific Coast Highway show examples that are not in fact even in mixed use zones that have commercial with some residential on top. So it would just open it up, create more opportunities for it to occur. So that's something that we'll definitely be looking at and bringing back to this body. The other provision where a change was made in 2010 was the prior code allowed for mixed-use development up to 45 feet. That was reduced to 38 feet with a provision in most of the mixed-use zones to allow for 45 feet on just portions if approved by the Planning Commission. Then also a big amendment that was made in 2010 was with respect to usable public open space. I talked a little bit about that before. But essentially, the current requirements now as a result of the amendment in 2010-11 requires mixed-use developments to develop 10% of their floor FAR as usable public open space. There was also some concern over parking, visitor parking in particular, and as a result, the prior visitor parking space requirements for mixed-use dwellings were the same as for non-mixed dwelling units. Then to address concerns of the public regarding the lack of visitor parking spaces in mixed-use projects, they were changed, and now current visitor parking requirements require additional visitor parking spaces if determined necessary by the Planning Commission due to some unique circumstances of the project and or surrounding neighborhood. So it's definitely a specific item that you look at as part of a mixed-use development review.
Commissioner Gann?
On this whole issue of open space, I think when people see it, they perceive open space as like parkland or public use land. But in fact, isn't open space in Redondo a sidewalk, a place where you put your trash cans? Aren't those all considered open spaces? I just think we should define that open space means open space, not the setback, not the sidewalk, not the cement underneath the trash container. It just seemed it would be like maybe a little more.
There actually is a definition in there, and it states usable public open space is defined as public plazas, public walkways, kind of to your point, and other public spaces. So it could be strengthened to address what you're
That's all
talking
I'm saying. Is it? I think when we talk about public space, let's talk about public space, and then if we're going to talk about sidewalks, let's call them sidewalks.
So are you asking though, or are you saying that, to me, just hearing what just was said, off of what Commissioner Gann said, public space, other public space could be a sidewalk then, correct?
That's correct.
Actually, I think the article says it has to be a minimum of 10 feet wide.
Yeah, then there's further requirements of dimension, minimum 10 feet in width.
But I could make a 10-foot wide sidewalk.
You could.
But
And
that's
you could.
public.
And if it was a contiguous sidewalk, it might be called a promenade.
To me, it sort of is not in the spirit, perhaps, of what we're intending.
Well,
Yeah.
I don't know whether,
Thank
I
you
think,
very-
I think what you're saying is you want to, these things to have enough that it's more than just what would be there. So a
Well, which
10-foot
is why I
walk-
think it goes
A 10-foot sidewalk.
to Tom's
I
point
agree with Tom.
about-
I think we,
Yeah,
but also to.
define it a little further, a little more detail.
And to kind of, in the sense that, you know, there's always going to be some public space because the sidewalks are required, so you want more than that stuff. I'm agreeing with you because I think you can add up a bunch of
I either
stuff.
want more than that, or I want 10% open space and have open space clearly defined
That
as,
isn't a sidewalk or.
as public space.
You come and sit on the
And I have a
sidewalk in front of my
question.
house if you
If we choose to amend this and, you know, the public space, height requirement, things like that, would those trigger an election?
They would not. They would not. They don't change the density or intensity of
And
potential
additionally,
development.
the visitor parking requirements, because that's a big thing.
Parking, setbacks, building height, all those things we've looked at.
It's just density that triggers a
It's
substantial
the
change.
comparison of the existing development to the potential development under the new code. We've determined that unless we require like a 50 or 90% open space, that would change the development potential. But as far as triggering a vote requirement, we don't believe that any change to height, setback, open space, the mix of uses is going to be a big issue.
Commissioner
I just
Funk?
had my question answered.
Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Okay. We can skip ahead to, those were all the changes that occurred in that 2010, 2011 amendment to the development standards. Those were the categories of changes. So thanks for the feedback on all those. It's a lot to ponder and bring back. If we go to slide 33, then, you know, essentially it's the mixed use discussion that we've been having. But I just wanted to point out some of the specific issues that have been repeatedly debated due to varying concerns regarding potential impacts on surrounding projects, on surrounding properties. You know, and we've talked about them all: residential density, allowable height, allowable FAR for commercial uses, and particularly, as Aaron just pointed out, the mix of uses, commercial and residential, and then breaking out various types of commercial as well, parking, project design, which Aaron also spoke of, and we provided those documents from the city of Santa Barbara, and basically quantifying design, measuring mass, bulk, and other elements of design, and then, you know, automobile access. But, you know, these are kind of the core issues here, and any others that are coming to your mind as we flesh this out, we're looking for that, and then we can bring it back to you in a, let's say, more distilled form. And that's really, the last couple slides. We added slide 35, and it was really to provide you with just, you know, what are the standards with respect to story limit, height, and density for all the zones in the city. So we laid that out in a table, just to give you kind of put it in context here. And then we had some, you know, the housing, the RHNA information here, and really that was just put there so you understand, the commission's aware that as we change, if density were to be changed, we'd have to recalculate and see where we are with respect to the RHNA numbers. And that's really it. With that, that concludes our formal presentation, and we ask for you to receive and file the report and provide staff with any comments.
Commissioner Vera?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to bring something up, and I think this is another one of little notes of something to have. I just learned an expensive lesson and learned an interesting term called plot tested.
Called what?
Plot testing, and it'll touch into something that you like a lot, which is the height of buildings and how you account for the existing ground. So as we look at FARs, and we look at an existing site, and we also take into account the way that building height is measured. And Redondo has a unique way of doing it, which is the average of the existing versus the proposed. It's not, okay. So it's to the existing ground? Okay, so even further complicates things, because if you take the FAR allocation and you have a fill condition, then you're going to, then it changes your FAR capacity, because now you have lesser building height. Because you can't meet to your total FAR. So I'm having to go through a specific plan amendment because I have units that were approved to a certain building height in FAR, but they were not plot tested on the site, did not account that fill was a requirement. And now we're finding out that our buildings can only be 1 story as opposed to the 2 stories that were approved. So,
And our current code has a fill limitation of 30 inches or 2.5 feet. So it's not going, that probably won't come into play for Redondo discussion.
but as things come into play, because we can't foresee, and it's almost ties into another thing I want to talk about. I mean, we look at how they didn't get it right in the 60s, they didn't get it right in the 70s, they didn't get it right in the 80s, they didn't get it, like, nobody ever gets it right. You can always kind of catch some stuff, and we come in and try to do some stuff. We're at a different price point on land where almost you would consider basements as a possibility. I mean, we just approved a car turnstile in Redondo Beach. So you're getting to land prices to that point that you can put a car on a plate and spin it around, because we're at that point that the next step is going to be excavation, an excavation that would basically affect the place where you measure your building height from. So I'm just looking at some of the other things to incorporate into the discussion that affects what the actual yield of each property is, which is, to what building height point is. It's, height from the City of Redondo Beach Code, which states the following, and then the variables that come in that you can, from excavation, that you can do. And if fill is a consideration, which I understand it's not here, I mean, we're built out, and I don't think we're going to be grading any hillsides. We don't have any. But we do have sites that are, if you did a land assemblage in Redondo, where you put a couple properties together, then you would have that issue.
And we will bring back information on the FAR. In fact, I see us coming back with some height diagrams showing you basement conditions and what would qualify as FAR under those conditions.
So tying this back to the plot testing, which was the expensive lesson learned, was, does the city have the ability to have an architect or retain someone to put together those wire diagrams where you can see these mixed-use height and the height plane and some of the things we've requested from developers to have to be the visuals that are part of this amendment, so we can see those and they're clear, instead of trying to figure out in your head what this height means and what the setbacks are?
We don't, under the process of this current limited amendment pertaining to mixed use, but we certainly would when it comes to overall general plan update process.
Okay.
I think we can do a very good job showing you the plot potential or the plot development maximums on a traditional lot or a traditional situation. I don't know if we can catch some of the nuances that you're looking at. If at mid-year, when council decides on the general plan update process, we expect allocation of funding for that, be it a limited or comprehensive update, and we'd absolutely have money at that point.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we need to answer all the questions, but I think it'd certainly help anybody coming in wanting to do anything in the city to avoid, well, this is what the code said and this is what we brought forward. And
I can give you examples of other cities that have unintentionally rezoned people's properties to actually prohibit access to their garages. It's been done. It's been done. Because they wanted basements to be basements on all 4 sides. So,
thank you.
Does this mean we'll have a discussion at a later date about how you measure buildings?
once again, we'll have another discussion on that.
Good.
Commissioner Sanchez?
The comparative summary tables and stuff like that, I notice, and probably well-intentioned and good reason, we reference a lot of communities or areas that are similar in size to the city of Redondo Beach, either population or land-wise. But have we looked at, do you guys consider communities larger? And some of the land use practices that go on there. The reason I ask the question is I just came back from Hong Kong, which is if there's any place on earth that I've ever been to that has mastered mixed use, it's got to be Hong Kong, and some of it good, some of it probably not so good. But are we looking beyond?
Keep making land.
What's that?
They keep making
They,
land.
they are,
so
they,
that's-
they are making land, but I was also quite impressed by the hotel that I was in, had a public park on the 11th floor, with trees growing and grass and the whole 9 yards, and I'm not suggesting
Plains
we are gonna
Landing.
go there. But there certainly, is there any value in looking at what folks do overseas or in places like that? Or is that just too high, pie in the sky, blah, blah, blah?
We love looking at things that are too urban and too interesting. But in an abundance of caution, and in an act of self-preservation, we're not proposing. But we can bring back some unique examples of other mixed use.
No, I'm not proposing we do parks on, the 11th floors of buildings, but it
We'll
was.
Open the papers. Planning Commissioner recommends aerial park.
Yeah, we're going to get
Planning
into my
Commissioner
open space
recommends
discussion.
100-story buildings.
Right.
And
Yeah.
some new land out in the
I
ocean.
am not suggesting that at all. I'm
I
asking.
heard it.
Okay, well,
Commissioner Ong?
Yeah, I was kind of curious. I'm trying to get my arms around the conditions in which an election would be triggered. Of course, folks want to start a GoFundMe account. That would be fine. But does modification of the FAR, does that trigger an election?
that one I can't answer. I know that the overall, there are a dozen triggers for an election requirement.
Okay.
And on the basic reason that downzoning does trigger election is when the existing condition and existing zoning, actually it's when the proposed zoning allows a significant increase above the existing condition. So to kind of explain that, if we looked at mixed-use sites in Redondo and currently developed with X number of square feet, and our current zoning allowed a larger number, and we wanted to even rezone to allow a smaller, it could trigger the requirement. So it could.
If you lower it too much, it would reduce the minimum building size to a point where you can't build to the density of, therefore changing the density. So that, as that number starts decreasing, the sizes start getting smaller, so.
I thought it was any substantial change in density, up or down.
No, there are certain triggers. They're based on 150 peak hour trips, any new development over 8.8 units per acre, and there's a list of 13 things we have to look at before we know.
The actual charter.
That's the charter language. There's a list of about 13 different requirements.
Yeah, because, I'm still kind of hung up on the fact that, in order to incentivize, people to do mixed use, because obviously people don't want to do it, you gotta, they're allowed to stuff more in the box. And I was curious whether, like I said, if you had a bonus, I'm just gonna throw something out, you've got 38 density units for the mixed use, right? 35 per. So if you can maintain that, but slightly reduce the FAR requirement, but on the other hand, saying if you were at, let's say, the 28, which is what your high density residential, you can have the 1.5. So I'm just trying to figure out, because if the builder is interested in having more square footage, they can do it, but with fewer dwelling units. But if they gotta have 35, they can do it, but with a smaller footprint. And at least they have the option to build the higher number, but it would be restricted in size, so you don't have a lot of,
But isn't that what state law allows now? Allows the FAR number to be, that everything changes if they get their bonuses.
Well, we can do some scenarios where the commission would look at a reduced density of 30 units per acre with a potential bonus and what that would look like. We can do 30 units per acre with a reduced FAR. And what you're really doing is you're going to balance number of units per acre and FAR, and in between that, the thing that changes is unit size.
yes.
So basically, if you're going to cut down on FAR and keep the density at this level, your units are going to get smaller.
Right.
And that's can be a good thing for affordability and other things in the community.
But it gives them the option of which one, and it prevents you from having the best of both worlds, which is maximum units and maximum, box.
So we'd be, if the commission's generally interested, we'd be coming back with a discussion of an incentive for smaller units.
Yeah, but not too small, like I said. I mean,
The smallest I've seen for built and occupied as a senior unit of 237 square
Okay.
feet.
Wow. I think
And
one of the
there's a
things,
lot of them.
if you have really small units, then you increase the parking need and traffic and all that, and so you're going the other direction, so.
yeah,
Commissioner
there
Gann?
has to be a line set, on that.
Commissioner Gann?
Just from a discussion point that we're talking about, wouldn't it make sense that we were able to identify underutilized property, an example being the property on Pacific Coast Highway? A lot of those businesses are grossly underutilized, and at the same time identify overutilized properties in the city and try to identify zoning changes or other changes, land use changes based on the utilization of the property. Because I think in some parts of our city, there needs to be attention to those specific problems that exist, where the remedy for those pieces of property would definitely not be the same remedy for these pieces of property.
That's a great point.
And I just think if there was some way that we could identify those.
We can, and in fact, for those of you that were around for the 92 general plan process, the General Plan Advisory Committee over a period of almost 3 years did actually identify targeted revitalization sites in the community. Believe it or not, almost all of them have been built. One was Ruxton Lane Industrial, where you had abandoned industrial buildings, literally abandoned, vacant, empty, where they we identified that as a targeted site for higher level of improvements. It would be part of a general plan process to go through the city and look at sites that are underutilized and sites that may be over benefited by the current zoning. And that's really a great part of the general plan process, is you can go through and pick out areas of the community that really should be upzoned and areas that probably should be downzoned. And
I think the difficulty in Redondo is so diverse, from South Redondo to North Redondo to Middle Redondo, and the businesses and where the businesses are and where they're not. I noticed there was a term here of the North Catalina Village Corridor. I never knew it existed, and I don't know where it is. But, I just think...
Catalina, Tom.
Well, I
North Catalina.
thought about that. But I just think that we've got to be flexible enough to assist those property owners whose property is not productive, and maybe throttle back some that are achieving a little too much from it.
Well, in the materials that we provided for this report, the mixed-use land use categories in the general plan, it is really clear they were very targeted, very thoughtfully determined to be targeted locations for mixed use. Whether you support mixed use or not, the theories that it'll reduce traffic and the other benefits with the intensification and the mix of uses, these locations that we've determined to be the locations for mixed use fit that model. And they were very strategic, and for other purposes like revitalization of underutilized properties. It was all very thoughtfully done in the 92 general plan update.
Yeah, so
You always hear people come to this commission and to the city council, and they complain about developers coming into the city of Redondo to do mixed-use property. The fact of the matter is, they don't decide to do mixed use. The general plan says they have to do mixed use.
no. It gives you the option of commercial.
Yeah.
Or commercial.
Well, the point is, though, that 1992 was a while ago. And the world's a different place, as
Yes, it
many
is.
people have said. So.
It is, and there's some new thinking about traditional mixed use. I'll be frank that the 92 plan and its, until we made some 2010-11 updates, was a very much more urban mixed-use plan where you had to have retail on the ground floor, couldn't do it without it, and we put that zoning on properties that are unlikely, if ever, to support retail on the ground floor. So we have underperforming commercial. So there is a need to go back and look at our mixed-use model. What should it look like? How big should it be? And where should we allow it? And you guys have done great work in flushing out all those issues. Like, does it make sense there at that corner anymore?
Shouldn't we even be able to find more examples now that it's other places that have done it well and not well?
Right. I'd love to take you guys some places, although that's per Brand Act a problem if non-existent option. But there are communities like Brea, Fullerton, Santa Barbara, my hometown, other places that make it work. And it's a little disruptive at first to the community, and there's always some opposition, but eventually it succeeds. And we'll want to show you examples of where it works and why it works.
We've talked about demand, but one thing that hasn't been brought up tonight that's surprising is affordability. I mean, I certainly know when we're talking about residential units that there's a large and growing number of Americans, especially in our area in the South Bay, who are feeling pushed out, man. They can't afford, much of anything. I mean, we got a lot of people renting. I mean, 2 out of 3, I think, in the South Bay rent. So if, in fact, we're able to get people to own residences, and if they're smaller, I mean, the demand is for small, and it's also that number's going up, and we see there's affordability. It seems like that should be part of the formula.
Well, is the demand for small because people want it to be small, or is the demands are small because they can't afford big?
All the above, Tom.
Yes.
All of these, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't somebody just come out with 200, did you say 260?
230 something was the smallest I've
So
seen.
that's where my kids are gonna send me? 200 feet?
Pretty much, Tom.
Holy. I better get busy slimming down a little.
Nice to them, Tom.
The new definition
But my point was to specifically about the mixed use. If people have done it successfully, it'd be nice to see examples so you can see, oh, that kind of thing worked in that kind of environment. Maybe it would work over here. Maybe not, because I don't think most of us had too much experience, and there is no real experience in Redondo Beach.
And Commissioner
Playa Vista
Sanchez
has more.
had show us examples of extremely urban developments. I think we've been actually looking for the examples of extremely suburban styles.
I wouldn't think
fit
of
in.
Hong Kong.
So
Singapore.
We'll look
The
for
talking point.
the best practices on some of the smaller scale mixed use.
Yeah, where the land already exists, and we have.
Right, and there's an economic tipping point we could zone it down to anything that we think is appropriate, it will never get built if it just doesn't make any sense. So, you know, there's a economic failure to what we do here too as well, potentially.
I'd like to make a motion, open up for public comment.
I think we just make a motion to receive and file, and then we can take public
Move
comment.
to receive and file.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I just want to note that I thought it was a really good discussion on this whole subject from everybody.
Would any of the public like to comment?
Oop, hold on, turn that light on.
Good evening, Commissioners and staff. Again, Pete Varenkoff, Redondo Beach resident for many years. I'd just like to add to the conversation and again reiterate, I think that the conversation was very, very good tonight. I may actually reinforce some of the statements that are here because I'm going to read this real quickly. I made an attempt to compare the city's land use element excerpts that were provided tonight, as well as the planning ordinance excerpts that were in the administrative report. And there appear to be some differences in language that are problematic, or at least problematic for me, so I'd like to call those to the Commission's attention. One extremely important example is how residential density is determined in these various documents. And I'd like to also reiterate and suggest that the city consider adding definitions to the development regulations and standards that clarify and strengthen the policies set forth in the general plan, because they can get kind of nebulous and ambiguous at points. The language used across the city's documents need to ensure that the intent of the Redondo Beach general plan is not circumvented. In the case of residential density, if land is not or cannot be developed for mixed use, it should not be used to determine permissible residential density. This is clearly the intent of the net acreage language that is in the general plan, but has been omitted from the ordinances and the documents. So now we can basically, if there's a ravine on the property, we can count that. If there's a hotel that is not going to move and it's not mixed use, we can count that. So there's some issues there, and in my mind that is actually driving a density on the buildable portion of the land. A second standard and regulation that should be reviewed, and we talked about it tonight, is the floor area ratio. Allowing the FAR to increase from a commercial zoning maximum of 1 to 1.5 for mixed use creates visually massive projects that will typically produce more traffic than the developments that they replace. According to the language in the general plan housing element, this increase of permissible FAR is provided to induce developers to redevelop commercial properties with mixed-use projects containing affordable housing. However, this increased density is more likely to produce vacant commercial space and does not appear to be a necessary inducement for the development of mixed-use project with maximum residential content, at least in some of the mixed-use areas. There are 4 primary mixed-use CR areas in Redondo Beach. The residential density and FAR maximums are currently the same for all. Some areas are more urban than others, and there is widely varying differing access to mass transit between them. Having the same density and intensity standards for all of these mixed-use and CR areas does not seem to be appropriate. It is my hope that the Planning Commission will take this opportunity to direct the city staff to recommend language changes to the development regulations. Am I up?
Thank you.
Sorry. Okay. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thanks. Anyone else wishing to speak?
Can we make a motion to receive and give back? Paperwork?
Because it's the holidays, or?
No, paperwork? You guys don't?
Extra copy, because we can't receive and give back.
Okay. Wait,
I guess we could receive, file, and give back at a future time.
can you receive file? I said earlier. Okay.
Motion to receive and file.
Second.
Any objections? Hearing none, so moved.
Thank you for having this discussion. Thank you very much for having discussion, a lot of things, particularly the look at other areas. I looked at the mixed use in San Diego, which is very, very successful. One thing that we're missing from this discussion in mixed use is that mixed use is a family of development. There is both horizontal mixed use and vertical mixed use. And that's very important because what we're talking about right now primarily is vertical mixed use, for instance, the Legato project. Horizontal mixed use in the Riviera Village, for instance, is spread out over a larger area, and that's what more modern type of developments are going towards. PCH is a traffic corridor along PCH, by PCH Boulevard. It's not a development corridor, it's not a high density development area. If you look at PCH on the Torrance side, it's all residential. And mixed use, generally speaking, requires a super high density area outside of the development inside of it that where it's being developed. So for instance, the Riviera Village would be a perfect example of where you would want mixed use for residential to get those people out. But when you're trying to create a mixed use area along a traffic corridor, you tend to get areas like 1800 PCH, which don't survive, don't work very well. If you look at the paperwork, there's a couple of things on there that I highlighted for you. The MU3 property that was along the traffic corridor on PCH, it was specifically chosen because of the large size of the property. It was not chosen because of the specific density in the area and the surrounding area, whether it's density of commercial or density of residential. And that's very important to realize because highly successful mixed use requires that high density area where people, traffic corridors. Traffic corridors is another major important part to TOD, traffic oriented development. If you look in that paperwork there, you'll see the traffic system that San Diego built up, and San Diego has that, and they have a village concept. And it's on the first page of your handouts there. The village concept includes all of the issues that I just talked about that makes mixed use very successful, and they've been very successful in their little areas, and they've created little villages, exactly what we have in Riviera Village, except they've added residential to that area. So you could rezone, according to RHNA numbers, you could rezone the PCH traffic corridor to no mixed use, residential, and then put that zoning onto the Riviera area in the downtown Riviera Village, which is exactly what the Avenue I area points out, that I believe is on here highlighted as well. Focal points is a lot of areas that was discussed about. You know, focal points isn't just, hey, we're going to build a large development here, we're going to build a large mixed-use project here, and then all of a sudden becomes a focal point. Focal point is much more than that. It's the entire community as a whole, and that's what we have in Riviera Village for a focal point of mixed use. So thank you very much, and hope you guys check that out and read that and do the research. Thanks. Have a great night. Thank you very much for your time.
Can you, excuse me, for the record, can you give me your name, please?
Nils Narenheim, Redondo Beach.
What is the name?
Nils Narenheim, Redondo Beach. Mr. Jones, thank you very much for sending out all those paperwork for the Legato project whenever it was the first time that I ever got something, so, from anyone. So, thank you. Thanks, guys. Have a great Christmas.
Thank you. And Hanukkah, let's not forget Kwanzaa and Hanukkah. Yeah, holiday.
Festivus.
For the rest of us.
And Festivus.
If anyone can tell me when the yellow comes on, I know I hate to run over, and I apologize if I do. The 2010 amendments, I just want to point out that things are changing so fast. I know you know this, but 5 years now equals at least 50 years. Things are just moving so quickly that looking at something and saying that it's only 5 years old is really not adequate. There's currently no good definition for mixed use. You've pointed that out to yourselves. Thoughts need to be given as to what types of businesses actually work in a given area. The ones that we have are struggling. In fact, to make your job even harder, I mean, you have a hard job to begin with, but North Redondo and South Redondo are so different. They're two different worlds. And one's a resort atmosphere, the other one is with no freeway access, and the other one is a freeway access, more of a normal community with kind of a heavier density. The trending, you're right, the smaller houses are trending, and that's something that I think maybe you should take a look at, because retirees and younger people and affordability, everything is all fitting together for smaller houses. In fact, a tiny house movement is really strong. I don't know if you've heard of that, but it's pretty strong stuff for 600 square foot houses. Supporting but not implementing, I just want to say, I think it's obvious, but it's penny wise and pound foolish. It's really not a good way to judge whether or not you're going to implement something. One thing I saw as a justification in the height density FAR was Avenue G. It's like it keeps pointing at that as, well, here it is, and it's not any more dense than that. Well, Avenue G, to me, represents the worst overdevelopment in Redondo. All mitigating options for parking have already been maxed out. Avenue G has parking permits for residents only, and then they have curb parking allowed right up to the driveway so that you cannot get on the street without being in the lane that you can't see. You have to make sure the lane coming the other way is open. That way they'll have a place to dodge you if you get out. And that's the truth. I do that every day. It's still a parking nightmare after all the mitigation, so there's nowhere to go from that. To justify this as for new dense development is kind of like saying it's the best looking kid in an ugly family. This information is taken from the Professional Builder website about 5 key elements for mixed use, and all 5, according to them, and I believe they're pretty accurate, have to be present for successful mixed use. Number 1, housing that fills an unmet or underserved need. Once again, North Redondo is more affordable, South Redondo is more affluent. The right type of commercial tenants. I've heard that there are 80 massage parlors in Redondo right now because they're very popular and they're taking all the empty spaces where the other places are leaving. Quality finishes and building amenities. You've kind of heard that, and I know you agree that the quality finish makes sense. Proximity to public transportation. That is so huge, and I know you know that, but that's just so huge. It needs to be considered. Architecture that respects the heritage of the neighborhood. And I'll leave it there. I thank you so much. And once again, gentlemen, I want to say I'm so proud of you, but I really am impressed. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm impressed only because I've been doing this almost 12 years, and it's the first time anybody in the public said that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think we better stop.
Well, you are. It's very thoughtful.
I agree, we're done.
It's really thoughtful tonight. It's very impressive, and it's great for us to hear it. Okay. When residents were recently invited to observe strategic...
I'm sorry.
Susan Rennick. Susan Rennick. The one prior? Yeah.
Thank you. Amy Josephek.
Hi, Amy.
Wait, he started my light already. Okay. Okay. When residents were recently invited to observe the strategic planning session, the conversation came to mixed-use development, and it was clear then as now that there are some great problems with the way the ordinances are written. For example, one current developer is proposing plans for a parcel with buildings already on it that everyone seems to agree will remain. It seems quite wrong to allow unbuildable acreage, in this case a hotel, to be used to determine the number of residential units that will be allowed. If a preserve was a part of the property, one never allowed to be built upon, just because the developer now owned the entire parcel, that would be bad math to include that preserve acreage into how much residential could be added onto the property. Different mixed-use regions in Redondo all have basically the same FAR and residential density requirements. Whether one has mass transit like the Galleria, which is, quote, extremely well served by 5 transit lines and a future light rail extension, or not. We understand the mixed-use concept was interesting when first introduced, but in a city as large and varied as Redondo, it's illogical for a one-size-fits-all solution to problems that vastly differ from one area like the Galleria to another like Riviera Village and its surrounding residential neighborhoods. Some areas are more urban, some more suburban, and should not be treated as the same. If, quote, the primary character of mixed-use developments should be commercial in nature so as to integrate with and enhance the quality of the surrounding business district, end quote, how can that happen and be possible when one is plunked down in the middle of what is clearly a primarily residential, not commercial neighborhood? Councilwoman MD was decisive that even problems like these could be fixed by process. My neighbors and I sure hope that's true, but we understand some officials prefer not to have residents vote on this very important issue. So we're really counting on you, planning commissioners, to seriously address this with changes that will make this ordinance fairer to neighbors who will have to live with your decisions for generations to come. we'll hope to see a vision that emerge that will allow Redondo Beach to both maintain its commercial viability in areas where appropriate, as well as preserve and enhance the residential charm that is the driving force behind what has made this such a desirable place to live for so long. City Council tabled a mixed-use moratorium, stating it could always be brought back. We ask that you continue to keep the unique quality of this area, especially around the Riviera Village. Do it by whatever means necessary, by process, by listening to homeowners deeply invested in their community, yes, even by a vote, but hopefully not from developers like the one we hear tonight is serving lobster dinner to residents and realtors in the hope of gaining their vote, or confusing many with the notion of affordable housing, which we know by now is really just market rate. Please listen to residents and neighbors rather than seeming to favor the wishes of developers who, contrary to fancy marketing catchphrases, are truly interested only in their out-of-town bottom lines. Thank you. And I have to say, it's adorable. I'm a New Yorker, and it's so cute to hear you get excited about mass transit. It really is adorable.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's who we are. That's us.
You're adorable.
You are all adorable.
Oh. Wow.
Must be the holidays.
Hi, my name is Irina Shelby, and I wanted to thank you so much for your very thoughtful discussion tonight. Mixed-use zoning is a lovely concept that has people living near shopping. But those same people aren't necessarily living near their work, nor are they living near all of their shopping needs, which then requires driving and therefore more traffic trips. Mixed-use zoning is a vehicle for density. If the area were zoned just for commercial, the allowable FAR would be 1.0. But with mixed use, the allowable FAR goes up to 1.5. In the meantime, if we look at South PCH from the Torrance City line around the corner by the village and up to Torrance Boulevard, there are a large number of vacant commercial properties. Building more commercial properties in this zone doesn't seem like a smart idea. And as Mr. Jones mentioned in the earlier report, the city doesn't want to become another Miami Beach and has in fact enacted changes to keep that from happening on our beach. So we don't need more residential units in this area either. The city has already approved a high-density project at Seabreeze Plaza that will add 52 units of new housing. That is almost half of the number, 120, that is being planned for the entire city for the year. The report you just heard in item number 8 said that the city plans for twice the development that is occurring. So this project alone essentially meets the need if you go by the numbers. And this is before we even begin to talk about any additional development along South PCH, let alone the Galleria project. I am not in favor of increasing development along South PCH. Riviera Village is enough of a shopping destination. We don't need it extended. However, if the stretch of PCH near the village remains as mixed use, there are a number of mitigating solutions that can be put into place to reduce the density problem. 1 is to reduce setbacks, 2 is to reduce allowable building height, 3 is to increase required open space, and 4, most importantly, is to reduce the allowable density. I strongly urge you to find a cost-effective way to put that issue on the ballot so that we can preserve our beach community and not destroy it with overbuilding. Thank you.
Thank you, Irina. Anybody else?
Motion to close public.
I have from Ms. Susan McCune. She left her item, and she couldn't stay for the meeting.
Yeah, we'll have the chair read it.
Hi, Marcy.
Yes, I just want to say that I agree with Shelby completely and with the other speakers, their comments. I do want to emphasize that we do have to reduce the density and we have to make a decision how we want to deal with Pacific Coast Highway. We want to just have commercial on the first floor and perhaps on the second floor we need to have office space, but residential I don't think that's the best use of that particular corridor. It's not wheelchair, it's not, PCH along this south part of PCH. So please keep that in mind. And another point that I want to bring up is that in cities of Redondo Beach streets, we have condominiums, and then we have offices on Catalina Avenue, which is not part of this discussion, but brings up to the question, is that block residential or is it commercial? And if so, how are we going to deal with the traffic, the speed limit? So that also brings up to that point. Like on Catalina, Torrance Boulevard to Pearl, you approve condominiums, and then we have offices, retail. So we need to start thinking about this too. How is that part of the mixed use? It was not mentioned that today.
Yeah, I'll answer that question. That was part of a very long fought and highly debated general plan rezoning in '92. Whether that block should stay all commercial, whether it should go all residential, and as it turns out, they split the baby, and you have a corner that's zoned residential and the rest of the block's zoned commercial. That's not a mixed-use discussion, but it is a general plan discussion for that.
Okay. Just to close, everybody has spoken very well. Please listen to them. They're brilliant ideas, and I appreciate you taking the time and being very inquisitive with the questions that you have asked staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcy. Commissioner Barrow?
I guess since a lot of the focus seems to be on one specific property, is there another route or a way to put a specific plan or an overlay over the Legato property that, or mixed-use property that would take care of a lot of these things? I mean, because a lot of the stuff that, I think, first of all, we have mixed-use, using a very old definition. So I think we just, I don't know what the current definition would be. But is there any other zoning alternatives or zoning overlays that can be put together, that can be put on, that does not require a public vote? Or is the policy so firm and solid it would not allow an overlay?
We do have a mixed-use overlay zoning district in our zoning ordinance. It's considered rezoning when you place that on a property.
Okay.
It would trigger the same basic standards and requirements.
So this discussion, is it for the overlay or is it for the underlying zoning?
We're talking about the underlying zoning in our package of draft amendments for further discussion. Given how important this is to the community, I suspect we're going to take a few meetings to get this thing right. So I'll report later on. The overlay, we'll have a discussion in the next
So we'll do that separate. We'll do the overlay separate. But
Yeah.
both of them will have to be consistent. We can't have an inconsistency in those two documents.
No, the overlay can be, and just for the benefit of all here, you're allowed to place additional zoning requirements and or allowances on a property that may be zoned otherwise by placing a floating zone or an overlay on top of it. And it gives you an opportunity to achieve what we talked about, some very targeted improvements. The Riviera Village, for example, has a village overlay, where there you have extra requirements for design for village character and things. And in mixed use, you can place an overlay that has other specific requirements. So we'll talk about overlay, I think.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so we finished number 9.
Yeah, and thank you for all of your input and the public's input, because, getting this right is important. I think that we have, everyone's interests here are important, and we're doing what we can to get the code in the best shape that's going to be a workable future code.
Getting it right will make our meetings a lot shorter.
Good thing.
Item 10, public participation on non-agenda items. If anybody in the public wants to speak on something that's not on the agenda, now is your opportunity. Okay. Oh.
I want to remind everyone, commissioners and residents, that we need to submit our comments about the Center Cal project. It's very important that we focus on the environmental report. You are the experts, and we need to say why we do not agree with that report. What are the flaws? Because in my opinion, based on what I have read so far, there is some flaws to that. So I would appreciate and remind the public to please get involved, submit your comments, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
And just to let everyone know, the deadline for public comment on that is January 19th at 5:30 p.m. And you can go to the city's website and download the entire document. And we'll look forward to getting your comments.
I apologize for coming back. I just want to ask a question. Susan Rennick, what happens with Legato project that has been appealed to the city council? All of the wonderful discussion that's taken place tonight, is that behind that project, or can it be applied to that project?
I personally can't answer.
I can't answer a question about the Legato project this evening. It's not on our agenda.
Well, this is a non-agenda question. That's the reason I'm asking.
No, for you, this gives you an opportunity to speak on non-agenda items. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are able to answer them.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. So we just have to wait and find out what happens at the city council meeting, or is there a possibility of contacting the lawyer to see what they say are the possibilities? Or I thought it was an easy question.
You could feel free to contact my staff at City Hall. Doree tomorrow will be happy to.
Yeah,
If
unfortunately,
you have
we
time
can't
tomorrow.
discuss
No
it.
worries at all. I just thought it'd be best to ask now on non-agenda. Thank you so much again.
Are we adjourning? Or?
Anybody else? Commission items and referrals to staff? Ms. Vibrating.
I do have one thing. I guess for a future discussion, I think for the city, I think we'd have a unusual, because we're a built-out city, I think the term growth doesn't apply to us anymore.
What term?
Term what?
Growth.
Growth.
There is, I mean, so growth in itself is just improperly used, and I guess just looking for a different word that we can do, because we're a built-out community, there's essentially nowhere to grow, and if growth is something that we are going to adopt, that we need for, sustainability, funding, then what does that really mean? So I'm just looking for a new interpretation of what built-out communities are using to achieve their growth or sustainability. I mean, is this, our ongoing sustainability, or is it our growth?
Or
Yeah, I think you have a
revitalization.
good point. What would be better was a more defined definition of growth.
Yeah.
Is it growth in population, growth in revenue, growth in tax revenue per person? What is growth?
Because we achieved build-out in 1980, and we've achieved, population capacity in 1980. So where are we, and what are communities that are built out at X population doing? And I thought it was funny too, so. So maybe I'm looking for support from this group to have another of these presentations where we have kind of a definition, but an analysis of other cities that are built out, that achieved their population, and how we would define growth going forward. So it's helpful in this mixed-use analysis that we know what it is that we want to do.
And that's going to overlap quite a bit into our general plan discussion, but I think we can talk about infill and change management and
Is it revitalization, redevelopment?
Yeah, I mean,
those are kind of the terms that come to my mind.
there, as Commissioner Barrow points out, nobody's really nailed what is it, but it's changed forward from that infill type situation. So I don't know if we if we can just use that as part of a theme of what we come back with, or do you want a specific discussion of that?
Well, isn't the issue is not how do we grow, but how do we change? I mean, is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's actually one of those big general plan overarching, when you open every general plan, how should the community change? How should we grow? How should we, those are big
So when are we going to do a new general plan?
Well, we're going to come up with
Yeah,
that.
so-
We're reporting back to City Council on February 2nd as to the, what does the existing general plan say? What is the process, timeframe, and costs of amending the general plan? And then on March 15th, we'll have mid-year budget discussions as to what type of funding is available for that effort. So that's where we're at.
Is it possible to do an incremental general plan instead of giant, you spend $2 million, $3 million, and, I mean,
Well, nowadays, the general plan, as somebody said tonight, 5 years is an eternity. Some cities believe in a living general plan, and they continually
thinking
work
perhaps-
on their general plan as much
perhaps
as anything
think about
else.
whether we could do it differently so that it isn't just this huge amount of money in one fell swoop.
Which strategically almost makes sense, because whatever we do now is what is going to be, it's kind of hard to believe that 2020 is around the corner. Most general plans were done for 2020, so now we're looking at 2050. So that's, you're redoing a 2050 plan. And the reason it would take so much is you would have, a new EIR and all these studies that would be done. That's why it is a $2 million study. But how can the city break that down and say, we can do
Address
this?
some problems that we know are existing without having to.
And we'll have a report, is that next month? And next month to the commission, we have a report on what does the existing general plan say? What are all the general plan policies? And so it's the Reader's Digest of our general plan.
Okay.
So that'll be kind of leading towards this discussion of what do you do after growth is over. But it also say what are our community-wide policies, and are those still valid? We won't ask the commission to weigh in with like answers, but we'd like to set that broad general plan framework. We can talk about, of the 7 required elements of a general plan, which ones really need changing, which ones are perfectly, hazards and safety. A lot of that's pretty standard.
Because although it's a 1992 general plan, the city was built out by 1980. So it was, so there are some things that are salvageable from it.
Oh, yeah.
So, and I that's almost kind of the point of, yes, it's 1992, but nothing's really changed. Some definitions have changed. There's some modern concepts that need to be incorporated. There's some new terminology that would be helpful, but there's certain things, traffic, things like that have not really changed.
So we'll have that discussion when it's on our agenda about general plan modernization, or whatever term we'll use, but and then how best to approach it. And we'll give 2 options. One's going to be the full Cadillac. The other one's going to be, a pretty solid Lexus or something else. But we'll get in there. Maybe an Infiniti. Depends on what you drive. And then the reality of how much funding we'll have will be a factor, and then the community input process, because that can, that can be a long effort. So,
Thank you.
Okay. Anything from Commissioner Gann?
No.
Commissioner Sanchez?
No.
No, I just appreciated the conversation tonight. I thought it was well done, and I wanted to wish everybody a happy holidays.
Thanks. Commissioner Ong?
Nothing.
Nothing, I agree, just like our houses, we're constantly making changes, remodeling. I don't know if I'd call it remodeling Redondo, but revitalizing it. We do need to bring it up to date. Items from staff.
let's include that with council action on commission items.
Okay.
I don't have any items from staff other than to wish the commission a happy holiday, and I probably should announce our city offices are open Monday and Tuesday next week, but they're shut down from that point through January 4th when we come back. So we get a big break this year. In terms of mayor and council action, there was an item that indirectly relates to the commission action. 2 items, actually. First was that the opportunity arose for us to restructure the financial arrangement on the Marine Avenue Hotel 3 project in order to be a win-win for the lessee and the city. An agreement was reached and approved by council that reduces the agency-funded reserve, which is the backstop for the hotel, from $8.5 million down to $2 million. The current balance, or I'm sorry, 2.5. The current fund balance is about 2.2. Therefore, cash flow from TOT will start flowing to the city next year if the loan closes and everything happens next month. The developer funded reserve went from $2.5 million to $1 million, thereby benefiting that situation, and the hotel occupancy is going great. So rather than have a big reserve that you can't touch, the city's cash flow will improve. And good timing with our Nordstrom project and other things happening. So the other action was that the battery storage amendments that were appealed up to the city council were continued until August 16th or August 19th. So I have to give both dates. I don't remember which. I believe the 16th, 2016, which is just after the interim settlement agreement between AES and the city would expire. So you know. Okay?
Okay. Nothing else? Make a move to adjourn?
Second.
Hearing no objections, so moved.